2 million years ago, long before cities rose from stone or languages danced on human tongues, the earth was an untamed theater of life. The continents we know today were already in place, but their moods were nothing like the familiar climates we walk through now. Africa, cradle of countless beginnings, was a land of restless skies and shifting terrains. Seasons arrived not with gentle transitions but with raw abruptness. Rains could sculpt rivers in weeks, droughts could turn them into dust within days. Life, in this world, lived at the mercy of a sky that seldom made promises. Across the sweeping savannas, herds of ancient antelope, elephants twice the size of their modern relatives, and towering giraffes moved in great waves. Predators prowled along the edges of these herds, massive saber-toothed cats, bone-crushing hyenas, and packs of wild dogs that hunted with remarkable intelligence. Every creature existed in a delicate balance of hunger and fear. And into this world, fragile yet resilient, walked a small population of early humans who were still learning what it meant to survive. These early hominins did not yet understand destiny. They did not know that evolution was slowly sculpting them into something unprecedented. But fate was already stirring in their bones. Their footsteps, imprinted in ancient mud and preserved by time, marked the beginning of a species that would one day reshape the planet. Yet at this moment, they were simply survivors, creatures trying to stay alive long enough to see the next sunrise. Life was unforgiving. Every day carried risks, the hunt, the search for water, the need to find shelter before nightfall. The nights were the most terrifying of all. When the sun dipped below the horizon, darkness swallowed everything. There were no stars bright enough to reveal predators lurking in the grass. No light to comfort the vulnerable. For early humans, night meant uncertainty, shadows that moved, sounds that hinted at threats, and a helplessness that pressed into the mind like cold hands. But darkness also held something else, mystery. A quietness that forced awareness inward. In those long hours beneath the African sky, something subtle began to awaken inside the minds of our ancestors, a flicker of curiosity, a sensitivity to patterns, an ability to imagine danger before it arrived. Evolution was slowly assembling the mental tools necessary for a being that would not just endure the world, but transform it. During the day, these early humans moved in small groups across the landscape. They followed the migrations of animals, learned the paths to safe watering holes, and discovered which plants healed and which poisoned. Their hands, though not yet masters of technology, were capable of shaping simple tools from stones. A sharpened edge meant the difference between scavenging scraps and breaking open bones to reach the rich marrow within. Every innovation was a step toward independence from nature's harshest laws. The earth around them was alive with fire, but it was not yet their ally. Lightning storms lit the sky with violent beauty, and when bolts struck dry grass, flames erupted in roaring waves. The early humans watched from a distance, mesmerized and terrified. Fire was a creature of the wild, powerful, unpredictable, untouchable. It reshaped landscapes, cleared forests, and left behind charred remains that animals would cautiously investigate once the smoke cleared. At first, humans were among those cautious scavengers, approaching the cooling edges of burnt ground to find cooked roots or weakened prey. They were witnesses to fire's dual nature, destruction and renewal. They sensed its danger long before they understood its potential. Flames devouring grasslands looked like living predators, bright, hungry, unstoppable. Yet something about the glow stirred an instinct deeper than fear. In the flicker of fire, they saw something no other creature responded to with such intensity. A question formed inside them, unspoken but persistent: what is this power? And could it ever belong to us? This was the world waiting to ignite, not just with fire, but with the beginning of human imagination. As the climate shifted and resources became unpredictable, the pressure of survival sharpened their minds. They learned to communicate more effectively with gestures and simple sounds. Eyes became storytellers. Hands became tools of expression. Cooperation grew from necessity, and with it came the earliest forms of shared knowledge. A mother showed her child where the safest rocks were found. A hunter demonstrated how to crack open a femur. A traveler pointed toward distant smoke on the horizon. These small exchanges carried the seeds of culture, though no one yet understood what culture meant. But something essential was happening. Information was flowing not just through instinct, but through choice. Through teaching. Through memory. In this world, every small advantage mattered. Early humans learned to recognize patterns in animal behavior, sense the shifts in wind before storms arrived, and read the footprints in soil to know which creatures had passed before them. Their survival depended on a growing awareness of time, rhythm, and consequence. The earth was their teacher, and every lesson was written in the dirt beneath their feet. And so, in the heart of Africa, among the grasslands and the fire-scarred plains, a new chapter in the story of life began. A chapter defined not by strength alone, but by the mind that observed, questioned, and dared to hope. This was the world before mastery, before tools grew complex, before migration reshaped continents, before flame danced in human hands. It was a world on the brink of transformation. Because somewhere in the vast landscape, a spark had appeared, not in the trees, not in the skies, but in the minds of our ancestors. A spark that would soon meet fire. A spark that would change everything that life on Earth understood about power. The world was waiting. And so were they. Nearly 2 million years ago, as the Earth shifted through cycles of rain and drought, a new kind of being emerged from the tapestry of evolution, one that would redefine what it meant to be human. They were not yet masters of fire or builders of vast migrations, but their bodies and minds carried clues of what was to come. This species would later be known as Homo erectus, and their arrival marked a turning point in the long, slow unfolding of human history. They walked differently. They thought differently. And somewhere within them, the first embers of human ambition began to glow. Their bodies told the story of change long before their actions did. Compared to the smaller, more ape-like hominins that preceded them, Homo erectus stood taller, with limbs built for endurance rather than short bursts of strength. Their legs were long and powerful, capable of carrying them across vast distances. Their torsos were narrow, allowing them to dissipate heat during long hours under the African sun. Their hands, with more precise grips and stronger thumbs, hinted at a future in which these tools of flesh would shape tools of stone. Evolution had molded them for movement, persistent, steady, relentless movement. But the most profound change was hidden inside their skulls. The brain of Homo erectus was nearly twice the size of earlier hominins. Though still smaller than modern human minds, it was large enough to support advanced problem-solving, social cooperation, and long-term planning. This was not simply an animal reacting to its surroundings, this was a creature beginning to anticipate them. Their minds flickered with curiosity, caution, and a growing ability to imagine outcomes before they unfolded. In the quiet spaces of thought, something distinctly human was awakening. Life for Homo erectus was not easy, but it was navigated with a level of intelligence the world had not yet seen from their ancestors. They could track animals across long distances by observing faint disturbances in the soil. They could predict the movement of herds by recognizing seasonal changes in foliage and weather. They learned which stones held the best edges, which plants eased hunger, and which landscapes offered the safest routes away from predators. Their survival was the result not only of instinct, but of choice, the first fragile steps into conscious decision-making. Their social structure also evolved alongside their bodies. Earlier hominins lived in small, loosely organized groups, but Homo erectus formed tighter, more coordinated bands. Cooperation meant life, isolation meant death. They hunted together, shared food, defended each other, and cared for injured members far beyond the abilities of previous species. These bonds were not just functional, they were emotional. With growing intelligence came growing attachment. The cries of a child, the pain of a wounded companion, the excitement of finding food, these moments forged relationships that deepened the social world of early humans. As their communities grew stronger, so did their culture. They began shaping stones into tools that were more than simple flakes. Their hand axes, symmetrical and deliberate, signaled a leap in abstract thinking. These tools required vision, an ability to see the final shape inside a raw stone and chip away at it with purpose. Toolmaking became a form of communication passed from one generation to the next. A child watched an elder split the rock along invisible lines. A young hunter imitated the movements until skill formed in his own hands. Through this apprenticeship, knowledge stopped belonging to individuals and began belonging to the group itself. Homo erectus lived at the intersection of innovation and necessity. Their larger brains demanded more calories, pushing them toward new sources of food. They scavenged and hunted with increasing efficiency. They cracked bones for the rich marrow within. They used tools to strip meat from carcasses too dangerous to approach empty-handed. Their growing dependence on meat not only fueled their bodies but fed the very brains driving their evolution. Here, biology and behavior twisted together in a loop that pulled them forward through time. Yet despite their growing abilities, they lived in constant tension with the world around them. Africa was home to formidable predators, creatures built for power, stealth, and death. A lone Homo erectus had little chance against a lion or a giant hyena, but their strength was not in their claws or teeth. It was in their minds and their numbers. They learned to intimidate predators by working together, by throwing stones, by shouting in coordinated rhythms that echoed across the plains. Their courage did not come from blind bravado but from an understanding that unity was a force stronger than tooth and claw. Their awareness of themselves in the world was still primitive, but it was undeniable. They recognized danger. They recognized opportunity. They recognized each other. Gazing at the bodies of their companions, they understood when someone was alive or dying. They sensed the weight of absence when a member of the group never returned. Their emotional landscapes deepened quietly, subtly, like the widening rings inside a growing tree. In this evolutionary moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. The planet had seen countless species rise and fall, but none had shown such a mixture of intelligence, resilience, and adaptability. Homo erectus was not the strongest creature in Africa, nor the fastest, nor the largest, yet they were something new, something the Earth had never witnessed. They carried the blueprint of a future they could not yet imagine. As droughts became more frequent and grassland stretched farther each year, they began wandering beyond the familiar plains of East Africa. Curiosity pulled them forward. Hunger pushed them onward. Their long legs carried them over ridges, across valleys, and toward horizons that no hominin had ever touched. Though they did not know it, they were preparing for a journey that would carry their descendants across continents. A journey that would eventually lead to the icy north, the lush forests of Asia, and the islands where ancient volcanoes breathed smoke into the sky. Homo erectus stood at the threshold between the past and the future, anchored in instinct, yet reaching slowly toward understanding. They were not yet storytellers, but every step they took wrote the first lines of the human saga. They did not yet command fire, but they sensed its power. They did not yet grasp their destiny, but evolution had chosen them to carry humanity's first spark. And as they looked out across the vast landscapes of Africa, the world seemed to whisper that something extraordinary was beginning. A species had risen that would challenge the limits of nature itself, a species with the potential to one day hold fire in its hands. The world that surrounded Homo erectus was a place where survival was negotiated daily, not guaranteed. It was a landscape shared with creatures far larger, faster, and stronger than anything humans would face today. To understand the courage and ingenuity of our ancestors, we must first understand the sheer scale of the danger they lived within. Every step across the African plains carried the possibility of death, every sound in the grass hinted at something capable of ending a life in seconds. It was a world calibrated for predators, and early humans were not at the top of that hierarchy. Across the open savannas, giant elephants wandered in massive herds, but these were not the elephants we know today. Some were towering species with immense tusks curving like white moons. Rhinoceroses roamed the plains in forms much bulkier and more temperamental than their modern relatives. There were massive giraffes whose necks stretched high above the treetops, their shadows gliding across the land like living pillars of bone and hide. These herbivores shaped the ecosystem, grinding down vegetation, trampling pathways, and creating pockets of safety or danger depending on their movements. But among them moved predators, silent, efficient, and terrifying. Saber-toothed cats stalked the grass with a patience born from millions of years of evolution. Their elongated canines were not just weapons, they were symbols of a world where brutality was an everyday reality. They hunted with ambush strategies, exploding from cover with lethal precision. For Homo erectus, a rustle in the tall grass could be the only warning before claws and teeth met flesh. Nearby prowled giant hyenas, far larger than the spotted hyenas known today, capable of crushing bone with a single bite. They worked in packs, using intelligence and coordination that echoed the social strategies of early humans. These hyenas were both competitors and threats, stealing kills, defending turf, and challenging humans for resources. When night descended, their echoes filled the plains, blending with the cries of distant lions and the thunderous footsteps of terrified prey. Crocodiles lurked along riverbanks, monstrous in size, their bodies unchanged for millions of years because they were already perfect predators. A moment of distraction at the water's edge could drag a young hominin into the depths before the group even understood what had happened. For Homo erectus, drinking water was not a simple act, it was a negotiation with death. Then there were the creatures that defied simple description. Massive birds like the giant crowned cranes or ancient raptors soared overhead, scanning the ground for movement. Herds of prehistoric pigs with razor-sharp tusks roamed in unpredictable patterns, capable of injuring or killing young humans with sudden charges. Even the insects carried dangers, flies that spread disease, ants that swarmed, bees that defended their hives with furious intensity. Nature offered no mercy. In this world of giants and predators, Homo erectus moved cautiously, learning to read the landscape the way others read symbols on a page. They memorized the trails of elephants, knowing those wide paths often meant safety from ambush predators. They learned that vultures circling above indicated a kill nearby, either an opportunity to scavenge or a warning that a predator was still feeding. These observations were not taught in structured lessons, they were imprinted through experience, fear, and survival. Children grew up in constant awareness of danger. They learned early to distinguish the difference between wind brushing the grass and something living pushing through it. Their senses sharpened, their reactions quickened. A shout from an elder could mean a lion approaching or a safe passage opening. Each day, they carried within them the collective memory of their group's struggles and triumphs. Yet despite the threats, there was beauty in their world, raw, breathtaking beauty. When herds thundered across the plains, kicking up clouds of dust that glowed in the sunlight, early humans watched with awe. When the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson, they felt a momentary peace. These landscapes shaped not only their bodies but their emotions, the fear, the wonder, the longing, the determination. Even in danger, they sensed the profound connection between themselves and the world they inhabited. But survival required more than admiration. Homo erectus had to carve out strategies to exist among giants. They often stayed near high ground or rocky outcrops, where predators had less advantage. They traveled in groups, knowing that unity intimidated even powerful hunters. They carried stones as makeshift weapons, not because a single stone could kill a lion, but because a barrage of stones thrown by many hands could confuse or deter it. Their voices, too, became tools, loud, coordinated shouts that created illusions of numbers and strength. Scavenging from predator kills was both opportunity and gamble. When a pride of lions left a carcass behind, early humans would approach cautiously, scanning for returning predators or lurking hyenas. They cracked open bones, retrieving nutritious marrow that predators often left uneaten. These moments were victories, but they were not without cost. Many ancestors likely died in desperate attempts to secure food. Every gain required risk. Every advancement demanded courage. And courage, in a world like this, was not the absence of fear, it was the capacity to act despite it. Homo erectus lived with fear woven into every breath, but their ability to navigate danger with intelligence set them apart from the animals around them. They watched predators not only to avoid them but to learn from them. They studied hunting patterns, migration routes, and behavioral cues. The savanna was their classroom, and every predator their reluctant teacher. As time passed, Homo erectus began to change not only physically but mentally. Constant exposure to danger forced them to develop sharper communication. A simple grunt could indicate a direction of threat. A hand signal could divide the group into roles, some to distract, others to flee, others to gather resources. Fear refined their ability to cooperate, and cooperation became their greatest weapon. This world of predators and giants did not crush Homo erectus, it forged them. The constant tension shaped their evolution, pushing them toward innovation and resilience. They became endurance runners capable of tracking prey for hours until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. They became scavengers, hunters, explorers, and eventually toolmakers with skills that widened the gap between themselves and their ancestors. In the shadow of saber-toothed cats and beneath the watchful eyes of massive hyenas, something remarkable happened. Early humans began to recognize their own potential. They understood, slowly and subtly, that their minds could compensate for their physical weaknesses. That intelligence could overcome brute strength. That strategy could outmaneuver instinct. And in this realization lay the foundation for everything that would follow. For fire. For migration. For the rise of new species. For the long journey out of Africa. In a world ruled by predators, Homo erectus discovered the power that would one day redefine the meaning of survival, not through muscle, but through mind. For early Homo erectus, fire was not yet something to command or control. It was a distant presence, mysterious, untouchable, frightening, and mesmerizing all at once. Long before they learned how to nurture flames, they lived as witnesses to nature's raw display of power. Fire erupted not from their hands, but from the sky, from storms, from the unpredictable violence of the environment itself. To understand how fire eventually became a tool, we must first understand how it appeared in their world, sudden, chaotic, and alive. The African plains were no strangers to lightning storms. Thunder rolled across the sky with a force that shook the ground beneath early humans' feet. Thick clouds, dark and heavy, gathered above the savanna, casting shadows over the land. And then, with a crack that echoed through the air, a bolt of lightning would strike dry grass or an old tree. Within moments, flames raced outward, climbing and devouring anything they touched. These fires spread fast, faster than any creature could run, and early humans could only watch from a distance as the landscape transformed into a sea of light. To Homo erectus, fire was a being that consumed, breathed, and moved with intention. Its edges danced unpredictably, flickering like living wings. It glowed in colors they saw nowhere else, yellow, orange, deep red, and sometimes a piercing blue when the heat grew intense. The smoke rose into the sky in twisting black columns, blotting out stars and sun alike. Even without understanding science, they recognized fire as a force beyond anything they had encountered. It terrified them, yet it drew their eyes like moths compelled toward a flame they dared not touch. When wildfires swept across grasslands, early humans fled to rocky outcrops or riverbeds where the flames could not reach. The smell of burning vegetation filled the air, mixed with the sharp scent of charred animals and the distant cries of panicked herds. Life scattered in every direction, zebras, antelope, elephants, all running from the same threat. In these moments, Homo erectus saw the power that nature wielded without mercy. But they also saw something more, the aftermath. When the fires finally died, the land was transformed. The once shifting grasses were replaced by blackened soil and ash. Trees stood like skeletons, stripped of leaves. But hidden among the destruction were opportunities. Animals that had failed to escape now lay still, some cooked by the heat, their flesh softened in ways early humans had never tasted before. Roots and tubers roasted beneath the earth were easier to chew and digest. Fruits hardened by flame revealed new flavors. And in these moments of cautious scavenging, Homo erectus experienced their first indirect taste of cooked food. They may not have understood why it tasted richer or why it filled their bodies with energy more efficiently, but the memory of the experience remained. Over time, they learned to search burnt landscapes not just with fear, but with curiosity. Fire, unpredictable as it was, left behind gifts, nutritional advantages that would change their biology across generations. But before that transformation could fully unfold, they had to understand the behavior of fire itself. As they studied wildfires from a distance, they noticed patterns. Fire clung to dry grass, but avoided wetter areas. It devoured fallen branches quickly but slowed when it reached stone or water. They learned how long it took for different materials to burn, how smoke carried the scent of flame long before it approached. They watched how wind shaped the direction of its spread, bending flames like a giant invisible hand guiding them across the plains. All of these observations lived in their minds as silent lessons, knowledge without words, passed through gestures, instincts, and lived experience. At night, when distant lightning ignited fire far beyond their reach, the glow illuminated the horizons like a second sunrise. Early humans gathered on hills or beneath sheltering cliffs to watch the flames dance in the distance. Their eyes reflected the moving light. Their bodies stiffened in fear yet softened with fascination. Something inside them recognized fire as different from other dangers. A lion could be avoided. A hyena could be scared off. But fire was a force that obeyed no creature, answered no challenge, and left behind worlds reborn. The first close encounters were accidental. After a wildfire burned out, embers often remained smoldering under layers of ash. A curious hominin might approach too closely, feeling the heat radiating from a seemingly lifeless mound. A step too near could send a spark of pain shooting through the skin. These early moments taught them the boundary between warmth and harm. Fire, they learned, could wound even without touching directly. But it also offered comfort, warmth during cold nights, light that kept predators at bay, and a sense of safety unlike anything experienced before. Even without controlling it, they felt its influence. A burning tree struck by lightning transformed the darkness into day. Predators hesitated near flame. The crackling sound of burning would signal both danger and opportunity. Slowly, the fear began to mix with respect. They did not run mindlessly from fire anymore, they watched it. They studied the dying embers. They learned that wet grass did not burn as easily. They discovered that fire left behind stones cracked and reshaped by heat, some easier to flake into tools. They saw how certain creatures avoided burnt areas while others flocked to them for fresh shoots that grew after the rains. Understanding did not come all at once, it emerged through generations of observations. Children grew up hearing the distant roar of fire. Adults navigated landscapes shaped by it. The group began to anticipate seasonal storms and the wildfires they brought. Without knowing it, they were already preparing for the greatest leap their species would ever take. Because somewhere deep inside their growing minds, a question began forming: if nature could create fire, could they someday touch it, hold it, or tame it? The idea was not yet a desire. Not yet a plan. Not yet a conscious dream. But the spark existed. In the hearts of a species standing on the brink of transformation, the first flicker of understanding had appeared. Fire was no longer just a terrifying spectacle, it was a possibility. A whisper of power waiting to be grasped. Fire had always existed in the world of Homo erectus, but until this moment in their story, it had remained firmly a force of nature, wild, untouchable, and feared. Yet something was changing. Generation after generation, their eyes had followed the movements of flame with a fascination that mirrored the spark awakening within their minds. Curiosity, once only a faint whisper, was becoming a pull strong enough to overcome instinct. And slowly, cautiously, they began to approach the very thing that had once sent them fleeing across the savannah. This section marks the beginning of the boldest shift in early human behavior, the first moments when courage overcame fear. A wildfire had swept across the plains the previous night, ignited by a violent storm that cracked the sky open with bolts of lightning. When morning arrived, the world felt transformed. Ash blanketed the ground in gray sheets, still warm beneath the feet. Smoke drifted in thin ribbons across the horizon. Trees that once stood tall now smoldered, their charred silhouettes reaching upward like the bones of some enormous creature long dead. The air carried a thick, biting scent that lingered in every breath. For most animals, this was a landscape to be avoided, too dangerous, too uncertain. But for a small group of early humans, something about the silence of the aftermath called to them. They moved slowly across the edge of the burnt field, their bodies tense, their steps deliberate. Every crackle of lingering fire sent a ripple of fear through the group, yet none turned away. Their leader, an older female with deep-set eyes and scars across her arms, walked ahead with a purposeful caution. She had survived many seasons. She had learned the language of storms, the rhythms of migration, the moods of predators. And now, she sensed that there was something important here, something worth understanding. The group watched her kneel beside a fallen tree still glowing with small pockets of flame. The heat radiated outward, brushing her skin like a warning. She extended her hand closer, then withdrew, testing her limits. Others watched closely, learning not from words, but from the courage displayed in her movements. They followed her example, approaching cautiously, leaning forward just enough to feel the warmth. Their breath trembled, their hearts pounded against their ribs, but they did not retreat. This moment, this simple act of standing near fire without running, was the beginning of a cognitive revolution. As they moved deeper into the scorched land, they found animals that had perished in the blaze. Some were small antelope, their bodies still intact but cooked by the heat. The smell was unfamiliar yet strangely enticing. The older female approached one carcass, sniffed it, and tore a piece cautiously. She tasted it, paused, then took another bite. The meat was softer, easier to chew, rich in nutrients. Her expression changed, not in the human sense of emotion as we know it, but in a subtle shift of body language that signaled approval. The group began to gather around her, sampling the cooked flesh. This discovery, though simple, would shape the destiny of their species. But the fire itself, living, breathing, shifting, was still the thing that demanded their attention most. The oldest members of the group had memories of individuals who had wandered too close and suffered fatal burns. These stories were not spoken narratives but memories etched into the collective caution of the group. Even so, something deeper now pushed them to study the flames more closely. A young male, lean and bold, approached a cluster of glowing embers left beneath half-burnt branches. The light cast flickering patterns across his face. He crouched low and extended a stick toward the glow. The end caught fire, flaring suddenly. Shocked, he dropped it, stumbling backward. The group recoiled with him, startled. But the flame on the stick continued to burn for a few moments before extinguishing on the ash-covered ground. This was a monumental moment, though they did not yet understand it. Fire had clung to wood, something they could carry, even if only briefly. The group gathered around the fallen branch, staring at it with wide, unblinking eyes. They had just witnessed fire transfer from one material to another. It was a lesson, a new rule of nature revealed. And with every observation, their understanding deepened. They learned that dry wood ignited more easily than wet. They learned that larger branches held embers longer. They learned that wind fed flames, making them grow stronger. Over the following days, the group lingered near the burnt landscape. They did not yet know how to create fire, but they were beginning to learn how to approach and observe it safely. They found that moving slowly avoided provoking sudden gusts of flame. They learned the boundary between warmth and heat, between safety and danger. Children watched the adults with wide eyes, absorbing every gesture, every hesitation. For them, fire was not only a threat but something their elders dared to study, a sign that it deserved attention rather than blind fear. Fear, however, never fully disappeared. Every approach to fire required courage. The instinct to flee was strong, bred by countless generations of danger. But courage does not replace fear, it coexists with it. And in Homo erectus, courage was beginning to grow stronger than ever before. Their curiosity about flame was not reckless, it was strategic. They sensed that understanding fire could open new possibilities for survival, even if they could not yet articulate those possibilities. One evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon, the group gathered near a smoldering tree. The glow cast long shadows across their faces. A gentle heat washed over them, keeping the cold night air at bay. For the first time, they lingered near a natural fire through the evening, watching the embers pulse like the heartbeat of the land. Predators kept their distance, unwilling to approach the strange light. The group slept in shifts, each member waking to find that warmth still radiated from the dying flames. In that shared experience, fear tempered by fascination, danger softened by opportunity, Homo erectus crossed an invisible threshold. They did not yet control fire, but they were learning its behavior. They were learning to be near it, to stay with it, to benefit from it without being destroyed. This was the first spark of mastery, the beginning of humanity's long relationship with the flame. And somewhere deep inside them, the first ember of intention had begun to glow. They did not yet know how to hold fire, but they knew they wanted to. Long before humanity learned to create fire, they learned something just as important: how to keep it alive. This was not mastery in the modern sense, but a kind of guardianship, a relationship built on vigilance, opportunity, and a growing sense of responsibility. Fire, once a distant terror, had become a rare but precious gift whenever nature allowed them to find it. After a wildfire burned out, when the wind softened and the land cooled, small pockets of glowing embers remained hidden beneath cracked branches and charred logs. These embers were the seeds of a power they could not yet make, but could preserve. And so began one of the earliest human traditions, the keeping of the flame. A group of Homo erectus stood at the edge of a burnt clearing, their bodies warmed by the fading heat of the earth. Among them was an older male with thick arms and deliberate movements, known within the group not by words, but through respect earned over seasons of survival. He approached a large fallen trunk still glowing from within. Smoke curled from the cracks like the breath of a sleeping creature. With slow, measured gestures, he tested the heat, learning exactly how close he could place his hands without harm. Others watched him carefully, recognizing that this moment held meaning. The group worked together to gather dry branches, twigs, and pieces of bark scattered around the clearing. They placed them strategically beside the glowing trunk, learning through trial which materials caught fire quickly and which smothered it. When the dried bark began to smoke, tiny flames leapt upward, fragile and trembling like the wings of a newborn bird. The group stepped back instinctively, but no one fled. They watched with awe as the flame grew, stabilized, and anchored itself to the fresh fuel they had provided. This was not yet fire-making, it was fire-keeping. A distinction subtle yet monumental. They had discovered that fire could be fed. That it needed material to grow. That it responded to their actions. For the first time, flame and human effort were linked in a shared, delicate balance. Though they did not create the spark, they had nurtured it. The implications of this act rippled quietly through their social world. Keeping the flame alive required constant attention. Without care, fire dimmed, shrank, and vanished back into cold ash. When the group traveled from one place to another, they learned to carry smoldering branches, pieces of wood with embers protected by layers of bark or leaves. They held these precious carriers in their hands with reverence, shielding them from wind and rain. The individuals chosen to carry these embers were not hunters or gatherers but those the group trusted, steady walkers, careful handlers, individuals with patience. These became the first fire keepers, though the concept existed only in practice, not in language. Their role changed the structure of the group. For the first time, a resource existed that required round-the-clock guardianship. Someone had to check the embers when the group paused to rest. Someone had to ensure the glowing wood did not go out during storms. Someone had to stay awake when wind threatened to snuff the fire or spread it dangerously. Through this quiet responsibility, new forms of cooperation emerged. Fire demanded discipline, and discipline demanded communication, not in words, but in shared looks, gestures, and the subtle rhythms of group behavior. With fire came warmth in cold nights. Sitting near the glowing embers, Homo erectus found comfort unlike anything they had known. The darkness no longer pressed in with the same suffocating weight. Shadows retreated. Predators hesitated, avoiding the unfamiliar light. Fear no longer dominated the night. Instead, early humans discovered stillness. They gathered closer, bodies relaxed, eyes reflecting the shifting orange glow. This intimacy, born from survival, became the first spark of early social bonding around fire. Parents kept their young near the warmth, where the flames cast gentle light over their sleeping faces. Elders shared food cooked by accident or curiosity, noticing how easier it was to chew and how full it made them feel. Over time, fire began to shape not just their environment but their biology. Cooked food meant more energy absorbed with less effort. More energy meant larger brains could be supported. Larger brains meant deeper thoughts, stronger emotions, richer memories. All of this, unknowingly, depended on the simple act of keeping the flame alive. Fire also changed how they understood danger. Where once they had cowered from wild animals in the dark, now they held a boundary of safety. Hyenas prowled at a distance, unwilling to approach the unfamiliar flickering light. Lions circled but stayed back, unsettled by the strange glow and heat. Even insects fled the smoke. The night no longer belonged entirely to predators, it was shared, reshaped by a species bold enough to sit beside fire. Still, fear remained an important teacher. If the flames grew too large, they could burn the very individuals who tended them. If wind lifted sparks into dry grass, it could ignite uncontrollable fires. Homo erectus learned to distinguish between nurturing and restraining fire. They added fuel slowly, carefully. They smothered flames when needed, using dirt or damp leaves. These lessons, learned through mistakes and losses, became part of their growing knowledge of fire behavior. As the seasons changed, and as groups traveled longer distances in search of food, the role of fire keepers became even more vital. Embers were guarded as fiercely as food and water. Sometimes, despite all efforts, fire was lost, extinguished by rain or forgotten in moments of distraction. When that happened, the group waited for the next storm, the next lightning strike, the next natural opportunity to reclaim fire. The frustration and vulnerability they felt in those moments revealed how deeply dependent they had already become on flame. The absence of fire made them colder, hungrier, and more cautious. Its presence made them stronger. Fire also reshaped their sense of place. Instead of wandering constantly at night, they began to return to certain spots, caves, overhangs, or clearings, where fires had once burned safely. These locations became early home bases, not permanent homes but preferred shelters. The idea of territory, of a place where the group felt secure, began to take shape around the presence of fire. Most importantly, fire required community. No single individual could care for it alone. It needed watchers, carriers, tenders, feeders. It demanded a shared purpose. Around the flame, the group became something more than a gathering of individuals, they became a united force, connected by a common responsibility. Fire was no longer just a natural phenomenon. It was the center of their social world. In the glow of flame, identities formed. Roles strengthened. Bonds deepened. And within these circles of light and warmth, the seeds of culture, the earliest whispers of what would one day become human civilization, began to take root. When Homo erectus first learned to keep fire alive, nights transformed from hours of dread into something entirely different, something new in the history of life on Earth. Before fire, darkness had belonged to predators. It swallowed everything, turning each sound into a threat, each shadow into a possible death. But now, circles of warm, flickering light pushed back the night, carving out pockets of safety where early humans gathered close together. These illuminated nights were unlike anything their ancestors had ever known. Light gave them time to breathe, to think, to share, to simply exist without fear tightening around their hearts. And in this rare space of safety, the first hints of human culture began to bloom. The flames crackled gently, sending embers spiraling upward into the cool evening air. Small insects flitted at the edge of the glow, confused by the strange brightness. The group sat in a loose circle, their bodies warmed by the fire and their eyes reflecting its shifting colors. The flames made their faces visible to one another, something that had never been possible in the deep night before. They could read expressions, fear, curiosity, tenderness, subtleties that firelight brought to life. Just seeing each other clearly in the dark was transformative. It allowed them to understand one another in ways that daylight alone never offered. Before fire, communication was limited to gestures and vocal calls during the day, when visibility allowed small differences in movement and posture to be understood. But now, in the evenings, the glow of the flames illuminated their hands, their faces, their shifting bodies. It allowed new forms of expression to emerge. Individuals gestured more deliberately, discovering that attention focused naturally toward the center of the fire, where light highlighted their motions. The shadows that danced on the surrounding rocks created a second world, figures made of darkness that mimicked their storytelling bodies. These accidental shadow performances would plant the seeds of artistic imagination in generations yet to come. Fire also gave them the first true sense of belonging during nighttime. Where once each individual had curled into themselves for protection, now they leaned closer to one another. They shared warmth and exchanged food cooked over embers. They groomed each other, picked parasites from hair and skin, and huddled in configurations of comfort rather than fear. These nightly gatherings strengthened social bonds in ways that daylight activities could not. During the day, survival demanded scattering, hunting, gathering, tracking, scavenging. But night brought them together, united around a single source of heat and safety. This closeness changed the emotional world of Homo erectus. They began to feel connected in deeper, more enduring ways. When an elder sat near the fire, the younger ones gathered around them instinctively, drawn not only by warmth but by wisdom. Though they had no formal language, quiet vocalizations, soft hums, grunts, and rhythmic breaths, began to take on new meanings. These sounds, amplified by the calm of the night, became tools for soothing, teaching, and bonding. Firelight served as a cradle for early emotional intelligence. In this safe space, simple forms of storytelling emerged, not with words, but with gestures and rhythmic movement. A hunter reenacted the chase of the day with sweeping motions of his arms. A gatherer showed how she had cracked open a rare root. A child mimicked the posture of a nearby predator, drawing laughter-like sounds from the group. These were not stories in the modern sense, but they were the earliest attempts to share experiences collectively, to compress time into symbolic acts, to create meaning from memory. Fire made this possible by giving them a setting where the group could remain together, alert yet unthreatened. The presence of fire also extended their waking hours. Early humans had never before stayed active deep into the night, except in fear. Now, the barrier of darkness had been lifted. They could continue shaping tools, cleaning hides, examining bones, or preparing food long after the sun had set. This extension of time changed the rhythm of their lives, allowing for learning, observation, and reflection that daylight alone could never support. More hours meant more opportunities to teach children, to distribute tasks, to reinforce relationships. Predators still roamed beyond the circle of light, their eyes reflecting faint glimmers from the flames. But the fire acted as a deterrent, confusing and intimidating animals unaccustomed to the heat and brightness. Hyenas paced at the edges of the clearing, emitting low growls but never crossing the boundary. Lions watched from a distance, unsettled by the dancing shadows. The very presence of fire created a fortress, a fragile yet powerful barrier that gave Homo erectus something they had never experienced before: control over their environment, even if only in a small radius. With safety came exploration of thought. For the first time in evolutionary history, hominins could sit still without danger pressing at their backs. In the quiet comfort of the firelight, they began to process the day's events, forming memories and anticipations. Their minds used this time to imagine, to strategize, to plan. Some stared deeply into the flames, entranced by the unpredictable movement, perhaps feeling the earliest stirrings of spirituality, a sense that fire was more than a phenomenon, that it was something alive, something powerful, perhaps even something with meaning. Parents watched their children play at the edge of the light, their small bodies leaping dramatically to imitate animals or elders. The imitation was not purely for entertainment, it strengthened memory and skill. Firelight allowed them to observe and mimic adult behaviors, reinforcing survival strategies. These playful reenactments laid the foundation for teaching traditions, ritual gestures, and social learning techniques that would shape the development of all future human cultures. The flames also provided emotional warmth, something rarely acknowledged but deeply significant. As the group gathered in a circle, as bodies pressed near each other, as gestures became more expressive, early humans experienced moments of peace and shared comfort that deepened their sense of community. Trust flourished in these circles. Vulnerability became safer. Cooperation strengthened not out of fear alone, but out of genuine connection. In these nightly gatherings, the seeds of everything distinctly human were planted: ritual, storytelling, reflection, cooperation, memory, meaning. Fire did not just illuminate the night, it illuminated the mind. It allowed early humans to imagine possibilities beyond immediate survival. It allowed them to rehearse the world in their thoughts, to experiment socially, to connect deeply. And so, night after night, as flames danced and shadows swayed, Homo erectus took a step closer to becoming the beings who would shape continents, command nature, and one day gaze at stars with questions instead of fear. Fire had already begun reshaping the nights and social worlds of Homo erectus, but its influence reached far deeper, into their bodies, into their brains, and into the very trajectory of human evolution. Long before they understood the science of heat or chemistry, early humans discovered something transformative: cooked food. It was a quiet revolution, born not from intention but from opportunity, yet it changed everything. To understand how Homo erectus became stronger, smarter, and more adaptable than any hominin before them, we must look at how fire altered the body, and how those changes awakened the mind. When the group first tasted meat softened by wildfire, they did not realize they were crossing an evolutionary threshold. For most of Earth's history, every creature had eaten raw food. It is difficult to digest, requires hours of chewing, and provides limited caloric return compared to the energy spent refining it. But cooked food, meat, roots, nuts, and tubers, unlocked energy that raw food never could. Fire broke down tough fibers, destroyed parasites, and made nutrients more accessible. And though early humans did not grasp the complexity behind this process, their bodies felt the difference. A cooked piece of meat could be swallowed with half the effort of raw flesh. A roasted root broke apart easily between their teeth, its bitterness softened, its nutrients absorbed quickly into their bloodstream. Suddenly, meals that once demanded long hours of chewing could be finished in minutes. Their jaws grew less strained. Their digestive systems worked more efficiently. And the energy saved, both in time and physical exertion, became fuel for something far more significant: the growth of the brain. The brain is a greedy organ. It demands enormous amounts of energy to function, more than any other part of the body. For the ancient hominins before Homo erectus, raw diet simply could not support much cognitive expansion. Their bodies needed large guts to process tough, fibrous foods, leaving less energy available for neurological development. But with cooked food, everything changed. Over generations, the digestive system began to shrink. The gut became smaller, leaner, more efficient. That saved energy was redirected upward, toward larger, more complex brains. This shift didn't happen overnight. It took countless generations for bodies to adapt to a diet increasingly shaped by fire. But the signs were there. Children who grew up eating food warmed by embers were stronger. They recovered from sickness faster. They spent less time chewing and more time exploring, watching, learning. Adults who ate cooked food had better stamina, sharper focus, and fewer digestive ailments. The benefits were subtle in the moment, but monumental over time. Around the fire, food became more than nourishment, it became an experience. The group gathered closely as someone retrieved a half-burned root or a small piece of meat placed beside embers. They passed food from hand to hand, creating a shared moment that built trust and cooperation. Cooking, though primitive, required patience. And that patience changed how they interacted with the world. Waiting for food to roast introduced new rhythms to their lives. While they waited, they observed each other. They communicated. They planned the next day's movements. The simple act of pausing for cooked food slowed their minds just enough to allow deeper thought. Those pauses were the birthplace of reflection. As their brains grew larger and more efficient, Homo erectus began to experience thoughts in more structured ways. They recognized patterns in nature more clearly. They remembered moments with greater detail. They recognized cause and effect not just in immediate reactions, but over longer spans of time. When they saw a burnt forest produce fresh plant growth weeks later, they connected the cycle. When they tasted a root cooked accidentally by fire and saw how easily it broke apart, they understood that fire could change food itself. With growing cognitive ability came emotional evolution. They cared for one another more deeply, not just out of instinct but out of comprehension. They remembered who had shared food, who had protected them, who had tended to embers during storms. Bonds thickened. The social world expanded beyond the present moment into something that resembled loyalty, gratitude, and responsibility. This emotional and cognitive development influenced every aspect of their lives, including how they used their tools. With more energy available to the brain, fine motor skills improved. Toolmaking became more refined. Symmetry began to appear more consistently in hand axes, showing that early humans now had the mental capacity to envision shapes before carving them. The mental blueprint came before the action, a crucial development in human thought. Fire also changed how Homo erectus understood themselves physically. The warmth allowed them to survive colder conditions, opening new habitats and forcing new adaptations. As they ate more cooked meat, their teeth grew smaller. Their jaws shortened. Their skulls reshaped to accommodate larger brains. These physical transformations made them look increasingly different from their ancestors, and increasingly similar to modern humans. Yet the most profound transformation happened internally. The fire's glow during nighttime gatherings created moments of introspection. Watching the flames flicker, Homo erectus began to sense a world beyond immediate survival. They stared into the shifting colors with quiet fascination, their thoughts drifting inward. Perhaps for the first time in history, a creature began to wonder, not just react. The mind that sat beside the fire was no longer driven solely by instinct. It was beginning to imagine. This imagination became a tool in itself. They visualized the path of tomorrow's hunt. They anticipated danger before hearing or seeing it. They remembered which tools worked best, which plants healed, which landscapes offered safety. The brain, enriched by fire's dietary and social effects, was evolving into an organ capable of prediction. In the spaces created by firelight, communication grew richer. Gestures became more deliberate. Vocalizations carried clearer meanings. The ability to articulate emotions and needs improved, strengthening group cohesion. Firelight illuminated faces, allowing them to read expressions with new clarity. A smile-like gesture, a frown, a tilt of the head, these became early symbols, precursors to language. The connection between cooked food and cognitive growth cannot be overstated. Without fire, the human brain could never have become what it is today. The calories unlocked by heat were the fuel for consciousness, creativity, and cultural evolution. The cooked body led to the cooked mind. As generations passed, the groups that embraced fire became more resilient. They spread farther, adapted better, cooperated more effectively. Those who failed to take advantage of fire's gifts fell behind in the struggle of evolution. Fire became the dividing line between stagnation and progress, between survival and prosperity. And though Homo erectus did not yet know how to make fire themselves, they had already taken the first step toward becoming masters of nature. The flame they tended not only warmed their bodies, it awakened their minds. The world that Homo erectus inhabited was never stable. It was a land in constant motion, not in the sense of geography shifting overnight, but in the deeper, slower rhythms of climate. Seasons stretched and shrank unpredictably. Rains that once flooded grasslands began to arrive late, or not at all. Rivers dried into narrow streams, then into cracked riverbeds that told stories of abundance long gone. Temperatures swung from intense heat to sudden cold. The earth itself seemed restless, shifting beneath early humans like a living creature breathing unevenly. And in the midst of this uncertainty, Homo erectus found themselves pushed toward choices that would reshape their destiny. Africa during the Pleistocene was a place of dramatic environmental change. Over thousands of years, lush forests receded, replaced by open grasslands and semi-arid plains. What had once been dense, shaded homes for earlier hominins transformed into vast expanses where resources were scattered and unpredictable. Water holes, once abundant, became rare and fiercely contested by every species on the savanna. Herds of animals shifted their routes as fresh grass became harder to find. This forced early humans into a new lifestyle, one that depended on movement rather than staying rooted to a single place. Homo erectus, already gifted with long legs and endurance, adapted to these changes with a resilience unmatched by previous hominins. They learned to travel farther in search of food and water. They became skilled at reading landscapes, predicting where rain might have fallen, and identifying which areas still held edible plants. But even their growing intelligence could not make up for the increasingly harsh environment. Droughts lasted longer. Periods of abundance grew shorter. The land no longer supported their growing communities as easily as before. These changes brought competition, dangerous, life-altering competition. Herds of elephants and antelope migrated earlier in the season, forcing predators to follow. Lions, giant hyenas, saber-toothed cats, and wild dogs shifted their hunting grounds, crossing paths with Homo erectus more often and more aggressively. Water holes became battlegrounds where early humans had to stand their ground, sometimes using fire or coordinated noise to deter predators. Each drink of water came with risk. Each day became a negotiation with a landscape that was no longer predictable. At first, Homo erectus responded to the changing climate by following familiar routes deeper into the interior of Africa. They moved between valleys, along rivers, and through savannas that had once sustained their ancestors. But gradually, even these familiar paths became unreliable. Grass failed to regrow. Animals abandoned their old feeding grounds. The wind carried dust instead of moisture. The earth was pushing them toward a realization: survival demanded something new. Migration was not a single decision made in a single moment. It was a gradual pulling of generations, a whisper from the land that said, move, or fade away. As conditions worsened, groups began exploring farther from their traditional territories. They climbed hills they had never climbed before, crossed plains that extended into unknown horizons, and approached forests that seemed unfamiliar and intimidating. At first, they did not intend to leave Africa entirely. They were simply following opportunity, food, water, safer terrain. But every step into new land carried them farther from their origins. Some groups returned when conditions improved temporarily, others pressed forward, discovering that new regions offered fresh resources untouched by overpopulation or drought. These movements created a slow but steady shift in human distribution. Fire, too, played a role in their expanding world. The warmth allowed them to venture into colder areas without fear of freezing. The ability to cook food opened new dietary options, letting them utilize environments that once offered too little nutrition. With fire at their side, the world no longer felt vast and unapproachable. It felt open, dangerous, yes, but full of possibility. The climate changes also shaped their emotional and social worlds. As resources became scarce, cooperation grew even more essential. Groups that worked together survived, those that fractured struggled. Older individuals, with years of environmental memory, became invaluable. Their knowledge of seasonal patterns, watering holes, migrations, and safe shelters guided the younger members. In a world that demanded constant movement, elders became living maps, repositories of wisdom that could mean the difference between life and death. The push to migrate also changed how Homo erectus perceived time. They no longer lived solely in the rhythm of day and night, but in the rhythm of seasons, cycles, and migrations. Their mind stretched to encompass longer patterns, remembering droughts from years before, recognizing the return of certain stars during favorable seasons, and anticipating the movement of herds. This expansion of temporal awareness was a quiet but profound cognitive leap. They were no longer creatures reacting purely to the present, they were beings capable of preparing for futures. Eventually, the changing Earth offered them a path outward. Northern Africa experienced periods of greening, moments when rivers swelled, grass returned, and ecosystems flourished briefly. During these windows of opportunity, Homo erectus followed animals northward, reaching regions that connected Africa to the rest of the world. They crossed through the Rift Valley, skirted lakes that shimmered under foreign skies, and moved into corridors that would one day be known as the Levant. They were not migrating with purpose or vision. They did not know they were becoming the first humans to leave Africa. They simply followed survival, guided by instinct sharpened by intelligence. Climate chaos pushed them, but curiosity pulled them too. Each new horizon stirred something inside, a faint echo of the boundless exploration that would one day define humanity. As they ventured farther from their birthplace, they encountered landscapes unlike anything they had known. Cooler breezes brushed their skin. New species appeared in forests and marshlands. Fruit tasted different. Rivers behaved differently. They learned to adapt, to test, to explore. Every new challenge refined their minds. Every new environment reshaped their bodies. The Earth, in all its chaos, was teaching Homo erectus to become a global traveler. Climate had forced their ancestors to walk. Now, it inspired them to journey. By the time the full weight of climate shift settled over Africa, many Homo erectus groups were already beyond its borders. Some eventually returned, others remained in foreign lands, and others continued moving, generation after generation, chasing opportunity across continents. What began as survival became the first great chapter in the human story of exploration, a chapter written not by choice, but by necessity, resilience, and the relentless push of a changing Earth. The first migrations of Homo erectus were not grand expeditions or planned journeys. They were quiet steps taken by individuals and families responding to hunger, climate shifts, shifting herds, and the subtle pull of curiosity woven into their evolving minds. There were no maps, no paths, no destination, only landscapes stretching endlessly ahead, inviting and intimidating in equal measure. Yet these early wanderers, driven by instinct sharpened through generations, began walking farther than any hominin before them. Their movement across continents was not heroic by intention, but by consequence. Each step they took unknowingly etched the beginning of humanity's global story. As small groups began drifting northward, the terrain changed beneath their feet. The familiar golden savannas of Africa slowly gave way to rocky plateaus, river valleys, and dense pockets of woodland. The Great Rift Valley, with its dramatic cliffs and deep lakes, served as a natural corridor guiding early humans away from their ancestral cradle. Here, the earth itself seemed to split open, offering passageways shaped by ancient tectonic forces. Homo erectus navigated these rugged landscapes with careful steps, always listening, always watching, every sound and every scent a message from the world around them. The Rift Valley was a mosaic of life. Herds of antelope moved through narrow corridors carved by rivers. Birds with brightly colored plumage soared above forest canopies. Streams shimmered with fish unfamiliar to African plains dwellers. These new environments presented both opportunities and dangers. The early migrants learned that fresh water did not always mean safety. Crocodiles here grew larger, stronger, and more territorial. Fruit grew on trees whose leaves they could not interpret yet, some sweet and nourishing, others bitter or toxic. But exploration was rewarded. They discovered new roots that could be roasted, new animals they could track, and new shelters where fires could survive the wind. As they continued northward, the air became cooler. Nights grew colder, urging them closer to the fires they carried. This cold was unlike the chill of African evenings. It lingered longer, seeped deeper into the bones, and demanded adaptation. Fire, once a rare convenience, now became essential. Groups gathered around their embers not just for safety, but for warmth, an element of survival in these unfamiliar climates. They huddled in tighter circles, creating a cocoon of heat and breath. In these moments, fire bonded them more intimately than ever before. The path out of Africa wasn't a single route but a gradual branching of possibilities. Some followed the Nile northward, drawn by its predictable flow and abundant life along its edges. Others drifted east through the Sinai Peninsula, crossing land bridges that formed and vanished with changing sea levels. They moved in groups, often splitting and reforming, guided by the availability of food and the memory of safer territories. Each decision, turn left at a river, climb a ridge, follow a herd, became part of a story unfolding across thousands of years. Beyond Africa, the landscape seemed almost otherworldly. The Levant, a region that would one day cradle human civilizations, was at the time a green, fertile paradise. Rivers wound through vibrant forests. Meadows bloomed with seasonal flowers. Animals unfamiliar to their eyes grazed in abundance, gazelles with delicate legs, boars with coarse hair, birds with markings they had never seen. The group paused often, observing these new creatures with both caution and intrigue. Every sighting was a lesson. Every discovery, a new tool in their growing mental arsenal. Predators in these regions were different, too. Packs of wolves roamed through the underbrush, their movements more coordinated and strategic than the hyenas back home. Large bears wandered forests, leaving claw marks on trees. Leopards, silent and patient, watched from the branches. Homo erectus had to relearn the rules of survival, adapting to predators whose behavior did not mirror the ones they had known in Africa. But with fire, tools, and cooperation, they held their ground. Migration reshaped the way they lived. They walked for long stretches, sometimes days, with little rest. Their endurance, one of their greatest evolutionary gifts, allowed them to outdistance competitors. When herds moved, they followed, tracking patterns across vast landscapes. They learned to anticipate seasonal shifts, when rains would come, when rivers would flood, when prey would migrate. This knowledge guided their movements, helping them survive in regions no hominin had ever explored before. The further they traveled, the more they encountered other groups of Homo erectus. Some meetings were peaceful, mutual curiosity expressed through gestures and cautious approaches. They exchanged tools, shared food, or simply observed one another before drifting apart again. Other encounters were tense, especially when resources were scarce. But these interactions were part of the broader evolutionary dance, shaping their social intelligence and teaching them when to approach, when to retreat, and when to cooperate. Along their paths, they found caves and natural shelters that offered refuge from the elements. These places became temporary homes, spaces where firelight flickered against walls that echoed with the sounds of grinding stone, snapping branches, and low vocal tones. Inside these shelters, the group slept securely, protected from predators and buffered from the wind. Over time, certain caves became familiar resting points, remembered across generations. These safe spaces acted like stepping stones along their expanding world. The journey out of Africa was not a single continuous migration but a series of movements across generations. Each group pushed slightly farther than the last, exploring new territories, adapting to new climates. Children born in the Levant grew up knowing forests and hills instead of African savannas. Their skills aligned with their environment, reading the bark of trees, tracking mountain goats, navigating rocky terrain. Evolution responded to these new pressures, subtly shaping their bodies and minds to match the demands of their world. But even as they moved farther from Africa, they carried their origins with them, the memory of flames crackling under the night sky, the rhythm of footsteps across plains, the lessons taught by elders. Fire remained their constant companion, an anchor of familiarity amidst the unknown. It guided their nights, protected their young, cooked their food, and shaped their social gatherings. Wherever they traveled, fire went with them, glowing embers wrapped in leaves, tucked inside hollowed wood, or guarded carefully in hands darkened by ash. Their footsteps across unfamiliar soil marked the beginning of humanity's global story. They did not know they were pioneers. They did not know they were the first of their kind to step beyond the boundaries of a continent that had shaped every generation before them. But with each step, they expanded the possibilities of what a hominin could endure and explore. And so, through valleys and across rivers, over hills and into forests, Homo erectus walked, driven by necessity, guided by instinct, strengthened by fire. Their journey was slow, uncertain, and filled with challenges, but it was unstoppable. These early travelers set in motion a movement that would eventually carry their descendants across Europe, Asia, and far beyond. The world was vast. The unknown was immense. But with fire in their hands and courage in their hearts, they stepped forward, into lands no human had ever seen, rewriting the destiny of their species with every stride. As Homo erectus pushed beyond the boundaries of Africa, the world began to change in ways they could feel in their bones. The air was different, cooler, carrying the sense of forests rather than vast savannas. The light filtered through unfamiliar trees that stood taller and denser than anything they had known. The ground became softer, shaded by canopies that swayed with gentle winds. They had crossed an invisible threshold, stepping into the Levant, a region rich with rivers, forests, and fertile expanses that must have seemed like an entirely new world. For early humans, this land was both a blessing and a challenge, filled with abundance yet unfamiliar dangers that demanded new strategies and instincts. The first sight of the Levantine green world must have been overwhelming. After generations of living in open plains, where the horizon stretched endlessly, entering dense forests meant confronting limited visibility. Every rustle in the undergrowth carried unknown possibilities. Shapes moved between trees, some harmless, some predatory, all foreign. Unlike the predictable openness of African savannas, these forests felt alive in a more enclosed, more intimate way. Shadows shifted unpredictably. Sounds echoed strangely. The group paused often, learning how to interpret the new environment with caution and curiosity. Rivers carved through valleys in winding paths, their waters clearer and colder than the streams of their homeland. Fish darted beneath the surface, glinting in the sunlight. Birds with colorful plumage perched on branches, calling to one another with songs that filled the air. The variety of life was astonishing. Food sources existed everywhere: berries, nuts, roots, small animals, but early humans had no knowledge of which were edible and which were dangerous. The learning process began slowly, through taste, observation, and trial. Elders watched animals closely, noting which plants they avoided, which fruits they sought. This strategy, combined with fire's ability to neutralize certain toxins, allowed Homo erectus to expand their diet in new ways. The Levant also introduced new predators, wolves that hunted in coordinated packs, stealthier and more persistent than the hyenas of Africa. Bears roamed the forests, huge and territorial. Leopards climbed trees effortlessly, waiting for the right moment to pounce. The rules of survival shifted. Instead of scanning wide horizons for threats, early humans now listened for silence, for the subtle crack of a branch or the change in birdsong that hinted at danger. Their awareness sharpened. Their instincts evolved. Their group cooperation tightened, as survival in these dense landscapes required constant communication, even without language. Despite these challenges, the Levant offered sanctuary in ways Africa sometimes could not. Caves, carved by thousands of years of water and wind, dotted the rocky hillsides. These natural shelters became invaluable. They protected the group from storms, allowed fires to burn safely, and served as resting places during long migrations. Inside these caves, firelight created new forms of understanding. The flames illuminated walls that shimmered with mineral colors, reds, browns, and yellows. Shadows danced across the stone, giving life to the imagination. These caves would later become sites where the descendants of Homo erectus left marks of their creativity, but even now, their presence shaped the growing depth of human awareness. Food was more abundant in the Levant than in many parts of Africa. Streams offered fish and freshwater mussels. Forest floors hid mushrooms, although dangerous ones taught hard lessons when consumed unknowingly. The group learned to adapt their tools to new environments. Hand axes shaped from local stone took on slightly different edges as they learned the new properties of Levantine flint. Spears crafted from forest wood became sturdier and longer, shaped to take advantage of denser vegetation and more agile prey. The climate played its role as well. Rain fell more frequently, nourishing the land but also threatening the embers carried by early humans. Fire keepers had to become more skilled, protecting flame from water and dampness with new techniques. They wrapped embers in pockets of bark or hid them inside dried plant fibers. When they reached caves, they used the stone walls to shield their fires from wind. Fire, once a companion they merely tended, now demanded adaptation as they moved between climates. Their mastery over flame grew indirectly through these challenges. As Homo erectus traveled deeper into the Levant, they encountered other groups. The meetings were cautious, marked by distance and silence at first. Both groups studied one another, identifying similarities and differences. Their tools looked familiar. Their gestures carried echoes of shared ancestry. But communication was subtle, through posture, through held-out hands, through offerings of shared meat or fruit. Some encounters lasted only moments before one group drifted away. Others led to brief alliances, where they hunted together or shared fire for a night. These interactions played a quiet but powerful role in spreading knowledge across regions. Techniques, instincts, and memories flowed between groups, shaping the evolution of all who wandered these lands. The Levantine world also transformed their emotional landscape. Forest nights were colder and darker than the open plains of Africa, but the fire they carried brought a sense of home into unfamiliar surroundings. The glow of flames reflected on cave walls created a new kind of intimacy. Family groups huddled close, sharing warmth and stories told in gestures and soft vocalizations. Children played in the firelight, imitating adults and learning new skills. The sense of us, the feeling of belonging to a group, deepened in these moments. Fire did more than warm their bodies, it bound their spirits. The greater variety of landscapes, hills, forests, river valleys, plateaus, required new forms of memory. They learned to navigate by recognizing shapes of mountains, patterns of flowing rivers, the smell of certain plants. Their cognitive maps grew more complex. Their ability to plan long-term improved. They anticipated weather changes by watching clouds gather against ridges. They predicted animal migrations by listening to distant calls. Slowly, thought became layered, richer, and more forward-thinking. Every step northward expanded the boundaries of their world, and their minds. The Levant was only the beginning, but it represented a monumental shift in the human story, the moment when early humans realized, consciously or not, that they could adapt to more than one kind of environment. They were no longer tied to the African savannas of their ancestors. They were becoming true travelers, capable of thriving in landscapes that required new skills, new instincts, new courage. Crossing into the Levantine green world was a threshold moment, an evolutionary doorway through which Homo erectus stepped into a wider, more varied earth. They had carried fire with them, both literally and metaphorically, and now that fire would guide them even farther. As Homo erectus continued moving beyond the Levant and deeper into Eurasia, the world transformed once again. The forests grew denser in some regions, but in others, they thinned into windswept plains where temperatures dipped lower than anything their ancestors had ever experienced. The air became sharper, carrying a chill that clung to their skin even in daylight. Nights grew colder, forcing them to gather closer around their fires. And with each new climate, each new challenge, their minds adapted in ways that would shape the evolution of all future humans. These were the cold worlds, regions where survival demanded innovation, planning, and cooperation on levels never before required. In Africa, warmth had been a constant companion. Even during cooler seasons, the sun offered enough heat for survival without complex shelters or protective coverings. But in the northern lands, cold was an enemy that struck relentlessly. It stiffened muscles, numbed fingers, and slowed movement. It turned water into ice and made nights dangerous even when predators stayed away. The mere act of waking in a cold morning required strength and determination. Early humans quickly understood that this new environment would not forgive mistakes. Their first defense was fire. Not just the fire they carried from place to place, but fire maintained through long nights and unpredictable storms. In these colder climates, they learned to build larger, more stable fires, stacking wood in ways that allowed flames to burn slowly through the night. They discovered that certain types of wood burned longer, giving off more heat. They collected fallen branches during daylight, learning to store dry materials for future use. Fire was no longer a passive presence, it became a carefully managed resource, something tended with strategy and understanding. Shelter also became essential. In Africa, caves and rock overhangs had been useful but optional. In the cold worlds, they were a necessity. Early humans sought out caves with small openings to trap heat, or narrow crevices where wind could not penetrate. When caves were not available, they constructed makeshift shelters using branches, leaves, and animal skins. These shelters were crude by modern standards, but they represented a profound leap in human behavior, the deliberate creation of protective structures. This ability to manipulate the environment for safety was a defining moment in the evolution of human intelligence. Clothing, too, began to emerge in its earliest form. While not tailored or sewn, animal hides were used to cover shoulders, backs, and legs, held in place by vines or simply draped around the body. They trapped heat, offering relief from biting cold. Children wrapped in furs survived nights that would otherwise have claimed them. The use of clothing required no complex language, only observation, repetition, and the ability to associate warmth with survival. It was another quiet revolution sparked by necessity. Their tools evolved alongside their shelters and clothing. Stone axes were shaped with sharper edges to cut through frozen wood. Spears became longer, allowing hunters to keep dangerous animals at a distance in snowy or slippery terrain. The Cold Worlds introduced new prey, massive deer, woolly rhinos, and early ancestors of what would one day become the mammoth. These animals required different hunting strategies. Homo erectus learned to track footprints in snow, to predict behavior, and to coordinate attacks with greater sophistication. Cooperation became more important than ever. No single individual could bring down large prey in such harsh environments. Survival belonged to the group. But it wasn't only their bodies and tools that adapted. It was their minds. Cold demanded planning. If they failed to gather enough wood before nightfall, they froze. If they failed to store food, hunger consumed them. Seasons became cycles they had to understand deeply. They learned that winter approached long before the snow fell. They watched the behavior of animals, noting when birds migrated, when leaves changed color, when rivers froze. This long-term awareness was new. Their ancestors had lived more in the present, reacting to immediate conditions. But Homo erectus and the Cold Worlds developed a relationship with the future. Their thoughts stretched beyond today's needs into tomorrow's risks. This mental expansion changed their social dynamics. Elders became vital sources of knowledge, having experienced many seasonal cycles. Their memories of past winters guided the group, where to find shelter, which valleys offered protection from wind, where herds traveled during colder months. Knowledge became a resource as important as food or fire. Younger members watched elders closely, absorbing their decisions, learning which signs predicted danger. The transmission of these learned behaviors strengthened not just individuals, but entire generations. Inside caves and shelters, the group gathered tightly, their breath filling the air with warmth. Fire cast long shadows on stone walls as they communicated using gestures and low vocalizations. These enclosed spaces amplified their sounds, creating echoes that fascinated them. Perhaps in these moments, they began to experiment with rhythm, claps, hums, or repeated calls that took advantage of the acoustics. The cold had confined them, but confinement fostered creativity. The walls around them became a canvas for thought, a space where minds grew more complex simply because they had the time and security to explore. The cold also shaped their emotional bonds. Struggling together against harsh climates deepened their sense of unity. A group that shared warmth, fire, food, and shelter developed empathy. They looked after one another because individual survival depended on collective effort. Injured members were not abandoned, for every capable pair of hands mattered. Children were shielded from wind by adults who placed themselves on the outer edges of the group. This protective behavior strengthened social cohesion and encouraged the evolution of compassion. As Homo erectus mastered these cold environments, they pushed even farther into Eurasia. Their expanding range demonstrated not only physical endurance, but mental flexibility. They learned that the world was not one landscape, but many, each demanding its own set of strategies. The cold tested them more intensely than any predator. It forced them to innovate, to plan, to cooperate. In doing so, it unlocked parts of the human mind that had never been used before. And yet, they did not merely survive, they thrived. Their numbers grew. Their migrations continued. Their understanding of fire, tools, shelter, and clothing deepened. Every new adaptation made the next one easier. The cold, instead of being a barrier, became a teacher, one that demanded resilience and rewarded intelligence. In these icy lands, Homo erectus began to resemble the humans of the future not just in body, but in thought. The Cold World sculpted new minds, minds capable of shaping destiny, not just reacting to it. Knowledge did not live in objects or in words during the age of Homo erectus. It lived in actions, in memories, in the subtle ways hands moved over stone, in the instinctive caution shown near fire, in the paths chosen during migration. Every lesson was learned through experience, through watching, imitating, failing, and trying again. Yet even without language, the transfer of knowledge became one of the most defining features of their evolution. What one generation discovered, the next inherited not through stories, but through quiet demonstrations repeated across countless seasons. In this way, knowledge became a bridge through time, carrying the growing intelligence of our ancestors forward. The scene often began around fire, the heart of their nightly life. Flames danced in the center of the group, illuminating the faces of elders whose eyes carried decades of memory. Children sat close, drawn by warmth but also by curiosity. They watched as adults chipped stone pieces with deliberate precision. Hands lifted rocks, found angles, struck with measured force. The sharp echo of stone hitting stone became a lesson in itself. Young eyes followed every movement, absorbing technique long before they could mimic it. And when the adults were done, the children picked up discarded flakes, trying their own hands at shaping the world. This was the earliest form of teaching, not instruction, but demonstration. An elder's actions became a silent story, told through repetition rather than words. Children learned not just toolmaking, but how to approach fire safely, how to test the strength of a branch, how to recognize edible roots by smell and texture. Each gesture carried meaning. Each movement held a memory of someone who had learned the same way from someone before them. As the group traveled, knowledge continued to flow. On long migrations, elders pointed out landmarks, mountains shaped like teeth, valleys where water pooled after storms, trees with bark that signaled nearby springs. They tapped the ground with their tools, showing the difference between soft soil and compacted earth, between dangerous marshland and solid footing. Younger members watched closely, imitating the way elders touched the earth, read the wind, and interpreted the behavior of animals. Over time, these observations became shared instincts, refined through generations of memory. This passing of knowledge had profound consequences. It meant that the discoveries of one generation did not die with them. Techniques, patterns, and strategies accumulated slowly, like embers saving warmth long after the original flame had cooled. The more knowledge passed down, the more capable each new generation became. They did not start from nothing, they began from the progress of those who had come before. Fire, especially, required this kind of generational memory. Learning how to maintain embers through rain, how to shield them during travel, how much fuel to add to keep flame alive, all of this depended on experience. A child who grew up watching fire being fed, who felt the heat of embers carried in hollow branches, who saw the consequences of letting flame die out, internalized these lessons deeply. By the time they reached adulthood, fire keeping was not a skill that required conscious thought, it had become instinct. Even the emotional landscape of knowledge began to evolve. Elder members of the group, once valued primarily for physical strength, now carried significance because of their memories. They became living archives. Their presence brought stability to the group. When a hunt failed, when storms destroyed shelters, when sickness spread, the elders remembered previous hardships and how they survived them. Their knowledge guided decisions about where to move next, where to find shelter, where to locate food during lean seasons. Survival became a collective act shaped by shared learning. The young did not simply imitate, they contributed. Their curiosity led them to explore small variations in behavior. A young hunter might experiment with a different angle of spear throw. A child might discover a new plant or a new way to crack a nut. These small innovations, tested in the safe environment of the group, could spread if successful. In this way, knowledge expanded not only through transmission but through experimentation. Every generation had the potential to add something new to the human story. By living in groups, Homo erectus created an environment where learning was constant. When one individual discovered a better way to sharpen a tool, the entire group adopted it. When someone learned that certain woods produced longer-lasting embers, that knowledge traveled with them. Innovations did not stay isolated, they spread through families, through migrations, through encounters with other bands of early humans. Over thousands of years, these exchanged ideas became the foundation of cultural evolution. firelight played a symbolic role in this transmission. Sitting around flames, early humans experienced moments of shared attention, everyone focused on the same source of warmth and light. This collective quiet allowed memory to settle more deeply. Knowledge shared near fire carried emotional weight, it felt safe, comforting, communal. Even without words, these nights created a fertile ground for the growth of social learning. And so, as Homo erectus moved across continents, they did not move as individuals blindly reacting to nature. They moved carrying the memories of generations. Every tool they shaped held echoes of past hands. Every fire they tended reflected techniques perfected through time. Every choice they made while migrating was informed by lessons learned long before they were born. Knowledge had become their inheritance. With it, they crossed deserts and forests, braved cold winds and shifting climates, hunted new prey, and adapted to landscapes no hominin had ever seen. Their minds, strengthened by generations of practice and observation, grew more capable of abstraction and planning. They began to recognize patterns across time, not just space. They anticipated seasonal changes, predicted animal migrations, and responded to hazards before they fully unfolded. In these moments of learning and teaching, humanity transformed. It was not just physical evolution, it was the evolution of culture, of memory, of intention. Every lesson passed on kept the species moving forward, one generation building quietly upon the achievements of the last. Though they did not yet know it, Homo erectus had discovered the most powerful tool of all, the ability to preserve knowledge beyond a single lifetime. As Homo erectus journeyed across continents, they were not always alone. The world they moved through was vast and filled with life, some familiar, some entirely foreign. Among the greatest uncertainties they encountered were beings that mirrored them in shape and movement yet were not the same. These were other hominins, earlier cousins or regional relatives, each shaped by their own struggles with climate and landscape. Such encounters were rare, stretched across decades or generations, but when they occurred, they carried profound consequences for behavior, culture, and evolution. Imagine a small band of Homo erectus moving through a forest clearing on a chilly morning. Mist curled along the ground, muffling sound and blurring distance. As they approached a stream to drink, they noticed motion across the water, figures, upright and moving on two legs, gathering roots near the riverbank. The strangers were smaller, with rounded skulls and less refined tools. These were likely descendants of Homo habilis or another early hominin species that had not yet adapted the same endurance and intelligence as Homo erectus. For a moment, both groups froze, each unsure whether the other represented danger or opportunity. Recognition and tension filled the air. The strangers were not predators, but neither were they prey. They were something in between, competitors for food, potential threats, or perhaps partners in an unspoken exchange. The silence stretched. No one moved. Even the forest seemed to pause, as if waiting to see how these distant relatives would respond. Homo erectus, with their more advanced social and cognitive abilities, were cautious but curious. Their instincts told them to watch first, act later. The other group mirrored this hesitation. A few moments passed in stillness before one of the strangers lifted a root and took a small step back, offering space rather than challenge. Homo erectus responded with a low vocalization, a neutral sound, neither aggressive nor inviting. Slowly, the tension softened. The groups remained separate, watching each other until the strangers eventually retreated into the forest. Such encounters varied widely. In some cases, the presence of other hominins led to conflict. Resources were limited, especially in times of drought or scarcity. When food was scarce, even distant relatives became rivals. Skirmishes broke out, short, intense bursts of aggression where stones were thrown or sticks used defensively. There were no wars as humans know them today, only brief struggles over territory, water, or prey. But even these moments shaped Homo erectus. They learned that not every upright being was a friend, that intelligence alone did not guarantee cooperation. Yet not all encounters were hostile. In places where food was abundant, curiosity outweighed competition. Groups sometimes observed each other from a distance, learning through imitation. One band might notice another using a new method to crack nuts or extract marrow from bones. Techniques traveled silently across species, spread not through conversation, but through observation. This cross-pollination of skills subtly influenced the development of tools and behaviors across regions. Some encounters were deeply emotional. When Homo erectus met hominins who resembled their earlier ancestors, they saw reflections of themselves but at different stages of evolution. These meetings were reminders of the long path their species had taken. Though they did not possess the concept of ancestry, something in their instincts recognized familiarity. Their reactions carried shades of empathy, curiosity, or even protection, emotions that evolved from the same social intelligence that bound their own groups together. In regions of Asia, where Homo erectus populations thrived for hundreds of thousands of years, they may have encountered other hominin species adapted to local environments, species with unique physical traits shaped by altitude, climate, or diet. These relatives were neither identical nor alien. Their existence challenged Homo erectus to refine their strategies, adapt more quickly, and remain vigilant. Evolution rewards those who cope with diversity, and every interaction, peaceful or tense, pushed Homo erectus toward greater adaptability. One of the most transformative aspects of these encounters was the way they expanded the mental world of early humans. Seeing another group that looked similar yet behaved differently introduced a new concept: variation. For the first time, Homo erectus understood that the world included beings like them and unlike them at the same time. This realization, though primitive, helped shape the beginnings of social identity, an awareness of us and others. These meetings also influenced migration patterns. When encountering groups occupying fertile valleys, Homo erectus sometimes shifted direction, seeking territory where competition was lower. At other times, they merged temporarily, forming larger groups that hunted together until diverging once more. The fluidity of these interactions taught them flexibility, an essential skill for survival across shifting landscapes. Occasionally, both groups benefited from proximity. When a more primitive species scavenged kills left by predators, Homo erectus learned the timing and patterns of those predators more quickly. In turn, smaller hominin groups may have found safety near the technologically superior Homo erectus, who kept fire alive and carried tools that warded off threats. These short-lived alliances left no records, but their influence echoed through the behaviors and survival strategies of both species. Children played a unique role during peaceful encounters. Their instinctive curiosity often broke the tension adults maintained. A child from one group might wander closer, intrigued by a tool or the glowing embers another group carried. Adults watched nervously but allowed these interactions when no immediate danger existed. Through these moments, both groups exchanged information, however limited. Even a simple gesture, touching a stone, pointing to food, showing a tool, became a tiny spark in the spread of knowledge across early human species. Fire itself affected these encounters. Homo erectus carrying flame held a power that other hominins lacked. The glow of firelight mesmerized those who had never tended flames themselves. Seeing fire under human control may have evoked fear, respect, or fascination. It set Homo erectus apart, drawing boundaries that were both symbolic and practical. In some cases, the presence of fire warned other groups to keep their distance. In others, it attracted them, an invitation to warmth and safety. Through fire, Homo erectus became both intimidating and alluring. These ancient meetings left no artifacts beyond scattered tools and footprints. But within the minds of those who lived through them, they planted ideas about competition, cooperation, imitation, and identity. The awareness of other hominins expanded their understanding of social life beyond their small groups. It introduced complexity into their interactions with the world. It encouraged innovation and cautious diplomacy. By encountering others like themselves, Homo erectus sharpened their own abilities. They strengthened their sense of belonging and identity. They recognized the value of their tools, their fire, their cooperation. These encounters accelerated cognitive evolution more than any single environmental challenge could. In these meetings, brief, silent, charged with tension and meaning, Homo erectus learned that they were not alone in the world. And in realizing this, they began to understand themselves more deeply. Long before Homo sapiens emerged, long before language shaped civilizations, early humans experienced a technological awakening that changed the path of evolution forever. This transformation did not begin with fire or migration, but with stone, cold, unyielding, ancient stone. In the hands of Homo erectus, stone became more than a natural object. It became a canvas for intention, creativity, and planning. This was the Acheulean Revolution, a turning point when tools evolved from simple fragments into sophisticated instruments that reflected not only survival needs but the growing intelligence of the hominin mind. The earliest tools used by humans were crude flakes, accidental shards created when stones collided. These flakes served immediate purposes: slicing meat, scraping hides, breaking open bones. But as Homo erectus evolved, something profound shifted. They began to see beyond the fragment. They began to imagine shapes hidden within raw stone. They began to understand that with enough strikes, patience, and precision, they could shape the world instead of merely reacting to it. A group gathered beneath the shade of a large tree, the ground littered with stones of various shapes and textures. An elder sat with a large chunk of flint resting on their thigh. In their hand was a hammerstone, smooth from years of use. With a firm, deliberate strike, they chipped a piece off the flint. Another strike followed. And another. A rhythm emerged, steady, intentional, almost meditative. Chips flew in arcs, catching the sunlight before dropping at the feet of the group. Slowly, the raw stone began to transform. What emerged from this careful process was not arbitrary. It was symmetrical, balanced, sharp along its edges, rounded in its curve. This was the hand axe, an Acheulean masterpiece. More than a tool, it was a symbol of cognition. To create such an object, Homo erectus needed more than strength. They needed foresight, spatial awareness, problem-solving ability, and memory. They had to visualize the final shape before it existed, a mental blueprint guiding each strike. This ability to plan ahead represented a monumental step in human evolution. Hand axes served many purposes. They sliced meat efficiently. They chopped wood, dug roots, cracked bones, shaped shelter materials, and served as weapons against predators. Their versatility turned them into the primary tool of Homo erectus for more than 1,000,000 years, a testament to their effectiveness. But beyond their function, they revealed something even more significant: the human desire for improvement. Early humans weren't satisfied with good enough. They refined, tested, and perfected their tools across generations. Crafting a hand axe was not something one individual mastered alone. It was a shared tradition. Young members watched elders knap stone, studying the angle of each strike, the force of each motion. They mimicked the process, often failing at first, producing lopsided or fractured pieces that lacked symmetry. Elders corrected them through gestures, demonstrating how to rotate the stone, how to aim for specific nodes, how to feel the internal tension of the material. Over time, this knowledge became ingrained, an early form of apprenticeship that foreshadowed future teaching methods. The Acheulean toolkit expanded as Homo erectus explored new environments. They adapted tool designs to local stone types. Some regions offered fine-grained flint ideal for sharp edges, others provided basalt, tougher but harder to work. Each new territory required innovation. Tools developed in Africa differed from those in the Levant or Asia, reflecting the diversity of landscapes. This adaptability highlighted the flexibility of Homo erectus minds. They were not bound by tradition alone, but willing to modify techniques based on experience. As their tools grew more complex, so did their social structures. Toolmaking became a communal activity, strengthening bonds within the group. When someone knapped stone, others gathered to watch. The sound of striking echoed across valleys, drawing individuals together. Knowledge shared in these moments reinforced unity. Toolmaking also introduced early humans to the concept of identity. A skilled toolmaker earned respect, becoming a valued member of the group. Their expertise contributed directly to survival. The hand axe, with its balance and symmetry, also revealed an emerging aesthetic sense. Though function was the priority, many Acheulean axes show remarkable beauty, smooth curves, evenly tapered edges, and polished surfaces. These touches suggest that Homo erectus appreciated form as well as function. They cared about the appearance of their tools, crafting them with intention that bordered on artistic expression. This aesthetic awareness indicated a deepening mental world, one where ideas of quality, refinement, and even beauty had begun to form. The evolution of toolmaking also influenced hunting strategies. With sharper tools, early humans could process food more efficiently, allowing them to consume a wider variety of animals. They could dismember carcasses quickly, reducing the risk of attracting predators. Tools helped them defend themselves, hunt smaller game, and build shelters. The Acheulean toolkit transformed Homo erectus from opportunistic scavengers into capable hunters and adaptable foragers. These new tools also changed how they interacted with the environment. Hills once avoided for their rocky terrain now became valuable sources of stone. Rivers provided not only water, but also deposits of flint, jasper, and quartz. Homo erectus learned to read landscapes not just for food or shelter, but for materials. Their mental maps expanded to include resource locations. This ability to remember and return to specific sites reflected a growing understanding of geography and long-term planning. Homo erectus also carried their tools across great distances during migrations. A hand axe found in one location might be made of stone sourced hundreds of kilometers away. These artifacts, scattered across Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and Asia, serve as silent witnesses to the journeys of early humans. They show that toolmaking was not a regional development but a shared evolution across populations, proof of communication, shared ancestry, and cultural continuity. The creation of larger and more refined tools likely influenced the evolution of language precursors. Coordinated efforts during hunts required more complex communication. Gestures became more nuanced. Vocalizations carried specific meanings tied to actions. The cognitive skills needed for toolmaking overlapped with those required for communication, memory, sequencing, intention, and shared understanding. Thus, tools shaped not only hands, but minds and social dynamics. The Acheulean Revolution also altered the rhythm of life. Instead of reacting purely to the immediate environment, Homo erectus learned to prepare. They chipped stones in advance of a hunt. They carried tools knowing they would be needed later. They shaped objects that might not be used for days or weeks. This behavior reflected a profound shift in consciousness, awareness of future needs. Planning became part of their lifestyle. This revolution marked one of the greatest leaps in early human history. With tools that reflected thought rather than impulse, Homo erectus transcended the boundaries of instinct. They began shaping the world instead of merely responding to it. Every hand axe was a message, an echo of the mind that created it. Each strike of stone against stone carried intention, skill, and memory. Through the Acheulean toolkit, Homo erectus stepped into a new realm of existence, one where their minds expanded beyond the present moment, where creativity mingled with necessity, where technology became an extension of identity. For Homo erectus, movement was not simply a response to scarcity or danger. It became a way of life, a rhythm, a cycle, a deep instinct that shaped their identity as a species. The world they inhabited was vast, seasonal, and constantly transforming. To survive, they had to understand not just where resources were, but when they would appear. This required an awareness of time, environment, and animal behavior that stretched far beyond immediate needs. In learning to track herds and seasons, Homo erectus developed a nomadic intelligence that laid the groundwork for human adaptability for hundreds of thousands of years. Their days began with observation. At dawn, when the first light melted the shadows, the group scanned the horizon. They watched for dust clouds kicked up by migrating herds. They studied bird flight patterns, noting when flocks moved in unusual directions. They listened to the distant beats of hoofs or the calls of predators. Every sound was a clue. Every movement in the tall grass carried meaning. Early humans tuned their senses to the landscapes around them the way later civilizations would read stars or scripture. Nature was their teacher, and they learned its language one season at a time. The relationship between Homo erectus and the herds was complicated. Herds of antelope, deer, or wild cattle gave them food, but these animals also challenged them. Herds moved constantly, driven by rainfall, grass growth, and temperature changes. To follow them required endurance, timing, and patience. A group that left too early or too late risked hunger or dangerous weather. So Homo erectus learned to anticipate shifts. They noticed when the grass began to yellow, when water holes shrank, when predators grew restless, signs that herds were preparing to move. This anticipation represented a major cognitive leap. It required memory, pattern recognition, and long-term planning. A group could not simply wake up and decide to travel. They had to store food, gather firewood, and prepare tools. They needed to identify safe routes, water sources along the path, and potential shelters. Migration became a communal effort, requiring coordination and cooperation. Children walked beside adults, learning the terrain through experience. Elders led with memory, recalling routes taken decades earlier. The migration paths were not straight lines. They wound through forests, over hills, across plains, and alongside rivers. Each landscape carried its own challenges. In open grasslands, they faced predators stalking in the tall grass. In forests, visibility dimmed, and ambushes became more common. In rocky terrain, footing was unstable, making falls a constant risk. But movement itself increased their awareness and adaptability. They learned to adjust their pace depending on weather. They learned which plants grew in each region. They learned how to navigate using the sun during the day and the position of certain stars at night. Their tools changed with their movement as well. In regions with abundant stone, they crafted new hand axes and scrapers. In areas lacking good materials, they carried tools from previous camps, objects that traveled with them across continents. Fire traveled too, a glowing ember wrapped carefully in bark or placed inside hollow wood. They protected it fiercely. Fire was not something they wanted to recreate, it was something they preserved, a living companion that walked with them through valleys and across rivers. When herds were finally located, a new phase of movement began. Homo erectus did not chase animals in the way modern humans might imagine. Instead, they shadowed them. They moved just far enough behind to observe without startling the herd. They learned when animals rested, when they drank, when they were vulnerable. Instead of sprinting after prey, they relied on persistence hunting, a strategy built on endurance. They followed an animal for hours or even days, waiting until heat or exhaustion slowed it down. This method required extraordinary stamina, but Homo erectus had evolved for distance. Their tall, lean bodies dissipated heat efficiently, allowing them to outlast many animals in long chases. During these journeys, the landscape became their map. They recognized certain trees, rocks, or river bends. These landmarks became mental markers passed down through generations. Here the herd once crossed. Here the water stays cool longest. Here the predators gather at dusk. These silent messages lived in memory, shaping the paths future groups followed. Seasonal cycles shaped every aspect of their lives. They understood the coming of rains not through a calendar, but through observation, the thickening of clouds, the migration of certain birds, the scent carried by wind. They anticipated cold seasons by the thinning of plant life, the thickening of animal coats, and the behavior of predators storing fat. The ability to read these signs was as important as toolmaking or fire-keeping. Entire migrations depended on predicting when the environment would shift. With movement came emotional transformation as well. Life on the move created bonds deeper than those formed around static shelters. The group relied on each member not just for food or protection, but for the shared responsibility of navigating the world. When someone fell behind, others slowed. When a child tired, adults carried them. When an elder remembered a safer route, the group followed. Migration was a collective act, a continuous reaffirmation of community. Along the way, they paused in temporary camps. These were not permanent homes, but moments of rest. Fire crackled, tools were repaired, meals were shared. Children played in the dust while adults planned the next leg of the journey. These camps created a rhythm, movement, rest, movement again, that shaped their internal sense of time. They did not think of days or months, they thought in terms of distances traveled, resources found, and seasons passed. Each campfire left behind a memory, and though they never returned to many of these places, the land itself became part of their story. As Homo erectus traveled across continents, they became masters of adaptation. They learned how to survive droughts by traveling toward mountains. They learned how to escape harsh winters by moving south. They learned which plants appeared only during certain seasons, which water sources dried quickly, which caves remained warm even in cold months. Their understanding of the natural world deepened with every migration, strengthening both their bodies and their minds. This constant movement also shaped their identity. They were not tied to one place. They belonged to the world itself. Their footsteps traced patterns across thousands of miles, marking the earliest human highways. They became explorers not by ambition, but by necessity, and through this necessity, they discovered their greatest strength, the ability to adapt to any landscape, any season, any challenge. In tracking herds and following seasons, Homo erectus learned to read time not as a linear path but as a circular rhythm. Every year brought familiar changes. Every migration echoed the last. Yet every journey taught something new. This balance between predictability and discovery shaped their minds into something flexible, observant, and endlessly curious. Migration was never a straight line toward opportunity. It was a long, winding path marked by hardship and uncertainty. For every peaceful night around the fire, there were nights filled with hunger, storms, illness, and fear. As Homo erectus crossed valleys, mountains, forests, and plains, they carried not only their tools and fire but also the weight of their experiences. The trials of distance shaped them, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, teaching them lessons that would echo across generations. Loss became a familiar shadow, memory became a guide, and continuity became a quiet promise carried in every step. The first great trial was hunger. When herds shifted unexpectedly or drought struck early, the group went days with little food. Their bodies thinned, movements slowed, and tempers flared. Children cried from weakness, their small forms clinging to adults who had little comfort to offer except warmth and closeness. In these moments, the group learned to rely on one another more deeply. Adults shared their rations with the young. Elders, sensing their dwindling strength, urged others to take priority. Hunger tested their unity, revealing both their vulnerability and their resilience. Along the journey, sickness sometimes struck without warning. A wound infected by dirt, a poisonous plant mistakenly eaten, a river crossed too soon after rain, any of these could bring fever or weakness. When someone fell ill, the group adapted. They slowed their pace, sheltered the sick beneath trees or in caves, and kept fire burning to fight the cold. The sick were not abandoned. Even when resources were scarce, time was carved out for care. This compassion, though simple, marked a profound shift in human behavior. Survival was no longer an individual struggle, it was a shared responsibility. But not every life could be saved. Death, inevitable and ever-present, walked with them. When a member of the group died, whether from age, injury, or illness, the air around the group changed. Movements grew slower. Voices softened. Children sensed the heaviness without understanding it. The body of the fallen was handled with care. Some groups left the body beneath natural shelters or near riverbanks. Others placed stones gently upon it, not as ritual but as instinctive protection against scavengers. These early moments of grief hinted at something extraordinary, the stirrings of mourning. The group paused after each death, even when danger pressed upon them. They lingered, sometimes for hours, sometimes for a day, as if acknowledging that the presence lost had once mattered. This pause, this recognition of absence, carried emotional depth that no other creature on earth understood. It bound the group through shared sorrow and strengthened their awareness of continuity. Life moved forward, but never without remembering what had been left behind. Memory became one of their most powerful tools. Not just memory of landscapes or hunting strategies, but memory of individuals, how someone laughed, how they walked, how they shaped tools or tended fire. These recollections lived silently within the group, shaping behavior long after the person was gone. Children imitated the gestures of elders they barely remembered. Adults honored the techniques taught by those who had passed. Memory preserved knowledge, but it also preserved identity. Distance brought other trials as well. Storms swept across plains with terrifying force. Lightning cracked through dark skies. Winds pushed against the group, pelting them with rain or snow. They huddled close, shielding the fire with their bodies. The fire keepers, those trusted with protecting the flame, risked burns and exhaustion to keep embers alive. In such moments, fire became more than survival, it became a symbol of endurance. As long as flame lived, hope lived with it. The earth itself tested them. Rivers swelled after rains, forcing the group to find safe crossings. Mountains demanded strength from their legs and courage from their hearts. Dense forests hid predators behind every rustle of leaves. Each new terrain required adaptation, and each adaptation left its mark on the group's memory. When they reached a familiar valley, a sense of relief washed over them, not because it was easy, but because the land held stories they recognized. Continuity lay in these places, in the repetition of steps taken long ago. Emotional bonds deepened under the strain of distance. As challenges grew harder, relationships grew stronger. Mothers held their children through cold nights, whispering soothing sounds. Partners shared food when hunger gnawed at their stomachs. Elders offered wisdom gained from years of survival. These connections were not just practical, they were emotional. Trust blossomed from shared suffering. Loyalty grew from shared triumphs and failures. Love, primitive, instinctive, yet powerful, wove itself into their lives. Around the fire at night, reflections emerged in simple gestures. A member would trace lines in the dirt, recalling the route they had taken. Another pointed to the stars, recognizing patterns that repeated across seasons. Though they had no language as we know it, their thoughts reached farther than ever before. They connected past with present, present with future. They sensed the continuity of their story. And as they traveled, children grew into adults, and adults into elders. Each generation carried the echoes of those before them. They learned to walk carefully over unstable ground, to read the moods of animals, to predict storms by the scent of the air. They learned how to grieve, how to heal, how to protect one another. These lessons did not fade. They merged into the collective wisdom of the group. The trials of distance shaped not only their behaviors but their minds. Struggle refined their judgment. Loss deepened their empathy. Memory strengthened their identity. Continuity became the thread that linked generations, an invisible current guiding them across continents. In these trials, Homo erectus learned something that would one day define humanity: that survival is not about strength alone. It is about endurance, connection, remembrance, and the shared hope that tomorrow might be kinder than today. As Homo erectus continued their long journey across continents, something remarkable was happening deep within them, something that could not be seen in their bones or measured by the tools they carried. It happened quietly, in the spaces between survival and reflection, in the glow of firelight, in the patterns they recognized in the world, in the decisions they made without yet understanding their significance. This was the emergence of a new kind of mind. A mind capable of imagination, strategy, planning, and meaning. A fire within, glowing just as surely as the flames they carried from camp to camp. For countless generations, their ancestors had lived moment to moment, shaped by instinct and necessity. But fire changed this. Its light extended their days, giving them evenings filled with time to observe, to think, to remember. As flames flickered and shadows moved across cave walls, early humans began to explore their internal worlds in ways no creature before them had done. Fire did not only warm their bodies, it illuminated their minds. Around the fire, thoughts began to stretch beyond the immediate. Homo erectus learned to anticipate events before they occurred. They looked at a gathering storm and predicted danger. They watched herds shift direction and anticipated where prey would be tomorrow. They recognized that embers left unattended would die, that food poorly stored would rot, that rivers swollen with rain would become impassable. These predictions required cognitive leaps, connections between past, present, and future that no earlier species had mastered. With planning came imagination. As they sat beside the fire, the crackling sounds invited reflection. They replayed hunts in their minds, analyzing what had gone well and what had failed. They considered new strategies, new angles, new possibilities. They imagined the movement of prey, the hunt, the chase. Their minds began to simulate the world, a powerful ability that would eventually allow humans to dream, to innovate, to create worlds that existed first in thought. The environment itself became a puzzle to decode. Patterns emerged: plants that grew only after certain rains, animals that appeared during particular seasons, stars that returned to the same place in the sky year after year. These patterns, once random, became meaningful. Homo erectus started to recognize cycles and rhythms. They learned that the world was not chaos, it had order, structure, and predictability. Understanding these rhythms made them more than survivors, it made them thinkers. Fire reinforced this rhythm. When they fed it too much wood at once, it flared unpredictably. When they waited too long, it faded. They learned to balance the elements, to give fire what it needed at the right time. This practical relationship fostered an early grasp of cause and effect. What they did influenced what happened. Their actions shaped outcomes. This realization, simple yet profound, lit the earliest sparks of human agency. Their communication grew richer as their minds expanded. Though they lacked modern language, their gestures became more refined. Their vocalizations carried more nuance, urgency, reassurance, excitement, warning. They learned to direct one another's attention intentionally, pointing at animals, tracks, distant firelight, or danger. These signals required shared understanding and joint intention. They were beginning to think together, not just as individuals. The fire within their minds also reshaped their emotions. They experienced deeper empathy, stronger bonds, and more complex social relationships. When a child cried in fear, adults soothed them gently. When someone was injured, others helped them walk or brought them food. These actions were not driven solely by instinct but by recognition of shared experience. They understood pain in others because they remembered pain in themselves. This ability to connect across emotional states strengthened the fabric of their groups. As cognition grew, so did creativity. Around the fire, when dangers were temporarily pushed aside, some individuals experimented with sound, rhythmic tapping of stones, humming tones, or repeating vocal patterns. These were not yet songs, but they hinted at the future of music. Others traced shapes in the dirt or on cave walls, watching shadows dance across their hands. They noticed how firelight transformed their surroundings, how gestures created illusions on stone. These moments, small, playful, seemingly insignificant, were the early seeds of art. They also developed a sense of curiosity beyond survival. They watched insects crawl near the fire, fascinated by their movement. They studied rocks that cracked under heat, plants that changed texture when cooked, bones that shattered differently depending on where they struck. Their observations expanded their understanding of the world's physical properties. They became explorers of both outer landscapes and inner thoughts. One of the most transformative cognitive developments was the emergence of memory linked to meaning. They no longer remembered simply because memory was useful, they remembered because experiences mattered. They recognized individuals, not just faces. They recalled the lessons taught by elders. They remembered places that had saved their lives or taken someone they loved. Memory shaped identity, grounding them in a shared history. The more they remembered, the more they planned. The more they planned, the more they adapted. And the more they adapted, the more their minds grew. Intelligence was not merely a biological advantage, it became a cultural one, something passed down through teaching, imitation, and storytelling gestures around the fire. Over generations, these cognitive sparks accumulated. They did not fade. They built upon one another, expanding the mental landscape of Homo erectus until something extraordinary became possible: reflection. There were moments, quiet and still, when an individual sat beside a dying fire and simply watched it. Not for warmth. Not for cooking. Not for safety. But out of wonder. Out of contemplation. Out of a growing awareness that the world held mysteries beyond immediate survival. This was the beginning of spirituality, not in a religious sense, but in the sense of feeling connected to something larger. The fire danced, alive and unpredictable. The stars glimmered overhead, fixed yet eternal. The wind whispered through trees in ways that stirred emotions difficult to name. These moments planted the seeds of awe, a uniquely human emotion that would later give rise to rituals, art, myth, and meaning. The fire within Homo erectus was not literal flame, yet it burned just as brightly. It was the spark of cognition, the glow of imagination, the warmth of empathy, the heat of curiosity. It pushed them forward, even when landscapes grew harsh and journeys long. It helped them adapt to the cold, cross continents, innovate tools, tend fire, and build social bonds that would define our species forever. In these quiet, flickering moments of consciousness, Homo erectus became more than survivors. They became thinkers. Dreamers. Innovators. They were lighting the future long before they understood what a future truly was. The journey of Homo erectus did not end in the Levant or the forests of Eurasia. With each generation, their footsteps stretched farther, carrying them into lands unlike anything their ancestors had known. Slowly, steadily, without maps or intentions of conquest, they expanded across continents. Their migrations were not dramatic bursts of exploration but long, flowing movements shaped by climate, scarcity, curiosity, and the steady push of survival. Over thousands of years, their trails reached East Asia, a region that would become one of the greatest chapters in early human history. These travelers left behind footprints, tools, and traces that would one day be uncovered, revealing a story of resilience, adaptation, and profound endurance. As they moved eastward, landscapes changed dramatically. Where earlier they had seen rivers lined with lush forests, they now encountered mountain ranges rising like ancient guardians across the earth. Peaks shrouded in mist, valleys carved by ice, and ridges that stretched endlessly pushed their endurance to new limits. These mountains demanded patience and strategy. They learned to seek passes instead of climbing directly. They recognized safe paths by watching animals. They navigated slopes carefully, gripping exposed roots or using sticks to steady themselves. Some climbs failed, forcing groups to turn back. Others opened new paths toward worlds they never could have imagined. Beyond the mountains, they stepped into landscapes filled with extremes. Northern China, during certain periods of the Pleistocene, was a land of fierce winds and sweeping cold. Winters arrived brutally, turning rivers to ice and the air to biting frost. Yet summers brought warmth, greenery, and abundant life. These seasonal contrasts demanded flexibility. Homo erectus learned to shift their strategies with the winds. In colder months, they stayed near sheltered caves or rocky outcrops, maintaining large fires and storing food when possible. In warmer months, they followed herds across open plains rich with grass and prey. One of the most iconic archaeological sites connected to Homo erectus is Zucudian near modern-day Beijing. Long before it became a landmark of scientific discovery, it was a shelter, a place where early humans found refuge from predators and weather. Imagine them entering the limestone cave for the first time, the echo of their footsteps bouncing off walls, the darkness swallowing their silhouettes, the excitement and fear lingering in the air. With fire in hand, they illuminated chambers that had never known human presence. Shadows danced across stone surfaces, revealing hollows, ledges, and natural walls that offered protection from storms. Inside these caves, firelight unveiled stories that would later fossilize in ash and bone. They cooked meat on heated stones, crafting meals that gave them strength for winter. They sharpened tools, their movements carving tiny marks into the floor. They gathered in circles, warmth gathering in the enclosed space, forming small social worlds within the darkness. Children played near the fire, their laughter echoing faintly. Elders shared gestures of knowledge, showing the younger how to position wood to keep fire alive through long nights. These caves became home, not permanently, but repeatedly across generations. As Homo erectus moved farther across East Asia, they encountered new species, animals adapted to icy winters, dense forests, and rugged terrain. They saw massive deer with branching antlers, wild horses that moved with explosive speed, boars with thick hides, and predators like leopards, wolves, and ancient tigers. Each encounter required new strategies. They learned to read the fresh snow for tracks. They timed hunts according to the behavior of local species. They experimented with new weapon shapes to match new prey. Their ability to adapt was their greatest skill, one that allowed them to thrive in environments far beyond their original homeland. The climate in East Asia fluctuated endlessly. There were periods of intense cold where the land froze under howling winds. There were seasons of warmth where rain nurtured forests abundant with edible plants. These cycles shaped the lives of Homo erectus. They learned to predict winter's arrival by the scent of the wind, the behavior of animals, the thickening of coats on prey. They gathered wood in advance, storing it in sheltered areas. They hunted aggressively during abundant seasons, knowing scarcity lay ahead. For the first time in human evolution, seasonal foresight became a defining survival trait. Their tools evolved once more. Stone found in East Asia had different qualities, some finer, some harder, some more brittle. This forced new techniques. Edges became sharper, tools more precise. Hand axes grew sleeker, adapted to butchering local prey or digging into frozen earth. Evidence suggests that these populations used fire extensively inside caves, perhaps even more than their Western relatives. Fire was central to their identity, a companion carried through wind, rain, and snow. The journey into Southeast Asia posed different challenges. Dense jungles replaced open plains. Humidity replaced cold winds. Here, predators struck from above as well as below, large cats leaped from trees, giant snakes moved silently through underbrush, and insects bit relentlessly. But jungle also offered bounty, fruit, nuts, edible roots, and smaller animals that could be trapped or hunted. Over generations, groups adapted to rainforest life. They moved differently, quieter, slower, more observant. They learned to use trees as lookout points. They recognized edible plants by smell and taste. They crafted tools suited for thick vegetation. Farther south still, some groups crossed natural land bridges during periods of low sea levels, eventually reaching islands like Java. It is here that fossils of Homo erectus, often called Java man, would one day be discovered. Reaching these islands required navigating coastlines, understanding tides, and following migration patterns of animals. Though they did not yet sail, their movements revealed an evolving understanding of geography and environmental rhythm. These eastward expansions were not driven by restlessness. Homo erectus did not dream of exploring continents. They simply followed life, followed herds, water, seasons. Yet their journeys became one of the most extraordinary achievements in human history. They transformed from regional survivors into global pioneers, testing the limits of what hominins could endure. Each new land shaped their identity. Each climate sculpted their bodies. Each challenge sharpened their minds. Their footprints, scattered across Asia, tell a story of persistence in the face of uncertainty. Their tools found near rivers, caves, and coastlines whisper of lives lived through adaptation and ingenuity. They did not know they were expanding the boundaries of human existence. They did not know they were the first to turn continents into connected worlds. They carried fire with them, but they also carried the deeper spark, the resilience and curiosity that define the human spirit. By the time Homo erectus had fully expanded into East Asia, they had become a species spread across thousands of miles, surviving in climates from frozen plains to tropical forests. Their story was one of movement, transformation, and endurance. And though they could not foresee the future, their footprints were paving the way for every human who would come after them. For hundreds of thousands of years, Homo erectus walked the earth as one of the most successful species that ever lived. They crossed continents, endured storms, mastered fire, honed tools, and adapted to climates so diverse that no other hominin had ever matched their range. But even the greatest journeys reached their end. The story of Homo erectus is not just about their rise, it is also about their fading, their disappearance, and the legacy they left for every human who followed. Their flame, once bright enough to illuminate entire landscapes, began to flicker. Not overnight, but slowly, across millennia, until only echoes remained in fossils, tools, and in the very biology of modern humans. Extinction was not a single event. It was a series of pressures that accumulated slowly, like ice building layer upon layer on a mountain until the weight becomes too much. Climate change was one of the first and most powerful forces. As Earth cycled through ice ages and warm periods, habitats shifted dramatically. Forests retreated, grasslands expanded, and then the cycle reversed. Rivers changed course. Prey species migrated unpredictably. The steady environments that once sustained Homo erectus began to fracture, forcing them into uneasy competition with emerging hominin species. Among these emerging species were groups with growing cognitive advantages. In Africa, Homo heidelbergensis and eventually Homo sapiens appeared, carrying larger brains and more sophisticated social structures. In Europe and parts of Asia, Neanderthals rose with remarkable adaptability to cold climates. Homo erectus, once the pioneering traveler of continents, now found themselves sharing the world with younger, more flexible minds. For the first time in a million years, they were no longer alone at the frontier of human evolution. Competition for resources intensified. The newcomers hunted more strategically, communicated more richly, cooperated with greater complexity. Their tools grew more refined, their shelters more advanced, their migrations more intentional. While Homo erectus continued to rely on Acheulean hand axes, younger species experimented with new toolkits, blades, points, scrapers, pushing technology into unexplored dimensions. Slowly, the old methods that had sustained Homo erectus for ages became less effective in a world growing colder and more competitive. Fire, once their greatest ally, could no longer compensate for the challenges ahead. The ability to control fire had spread to other hominins. What had once set Homo erectus apart now belonged to many. Fire was no longer a mark of dominance, it was the new baseline of survival. The fragile superiority they once held dissolved. Yet extinction did not come from competition alone. Fragmentation played a role. As populations grew smaller and more isolated, the flow of knowledge, tools, and genetic diversity weakened. Small groups became vulnerable to disease, famine, storms, and predator attacks. Some regions saw entire bands vanish due to a single harsh winter or a drought that lasted too long. Others dwindled slowly, failing to keep pace with the changes around them. Isolation, once a strength in exploring new territories, became a quiet undoing. But even in decline, Homo erectus endured longer than nearly any other human species. In Indonesia, isolated populations survived for astonishing lengths of time. On the island of Java, evidence suggests that Homo erectus persisted until as recently as 100,000 years ago, long after their relatives elsewhere had disappeared. These last survivors lived in pockets of stability, maintaining traditions passed down through thousands of generations. They shaped stone, kept fire, hunted, gathered, raised children, and lived lives filled with the same rhythms of hope and struggle as their ancestors. Imagine one of these last groups on a warm evening near a riverbank. Their fire glows softly, casting gentle light on faces weathered by time. Children play with stones, unaware that they are among the last of their kind. Adults sharpen tools, their gestures echoes of ancestors who once crossed continents. They do not know they are nearing the end of their species. No creature ever knows when its story is close to its last chapter. They only know the present moment, the warmth of fire, the scent of food, the whispers of wind. Their continuity is an illusion held together by instinct, unaware that the world around them is shifting beyond their grasp. The disappearance of Homo erectus was quiet. No catastrophe wiped them out. No single predator or disease consumed them. Instead, they faded the way old fires fade, slowly, softly, until only embers remain. Their extinction was not a failure but a transition. They had carried the flame of humanity farther than anyone before them. They had given the world 1,000,000 years of endurance, creativity, and exploration. And they had laid the foundation for the rise of species whose minds would carry their legacy into eras they could never have imagined. That legacy lives in us. Every modern human carries echoes of Homo erectus in their bones, in their DNA, in the shape of their hands and feet, in the structure of their spine, in the endurance of their legs. Our ability to run long distances, to sweat and cool our bodies efficiently, to grasp tools with precision, these are gifts from Homo erectus. Our capacity for planning, cooperation, reflection, and persistence traces back to their cognitive evolution. The stone tools we study today are not just artifacts, they are messages from our ancestors, whispering across time that the human journey began with their ingenuity. Even fire, the symbol of civilization, owes its lineage to them. They were the first to tend flame, to nurture it, to carry it across mountains and rivers, to protect it through storms. Every campfire lit today, every stove, every lantern, every spark that fuels human progress, carries the memory of those early fire keepers. Their extinction may seem like an ending, but in truth, it is a continuation. Their story did not vanish with them, it became the foundation of ours. Their footsteps guided the migrations of species that came after. Their innovations shaped the tools that led to future revolutions. Their courage to journey into the unknown became the blueprint for the explorers, wanderers, scientists, and dreamers who would one day traverse the entire planet, and look beyond it. Homo erectus lived an extraordinary story, one measured not in centuries or millennia but in epochs. They were the bridge between the past and the future, between instinct and intellect, between darkness and the first controlled flames of human consciousness. Their flame may have been fragile, but it burned long enough to ignite everything that followed.